Chapter 2055 Strange Dragon Crystal. Chapter 2055 Strange Dragon Crystal. When the golden condor saw that its attack had had no effect, it involuntarily released another cry. However, this time it did not release any sound wave blade. It was just a furious cry, as if it was wondering why it had not managed to kill Ling Han and his party with this attack. It was extremely fast. With a quick flap of wings, it had already disappeared in the distance, but it was soon followed by a quick turn. It had immediately flown back, gliding in the skies, but considerably slower now. The golden condor glared at Ling Han and his group, its eyes glittering with coldness. Suddenly, it released another sharp cry that turned into 4 sound wave blades that struck out towards Ling Han, the Empress, Qingyue, and bewitching Maiden Ro, respectively. It was still not giving up. Ling Han moved, and it was still great clash of source powers. A frightening storm of energy exploded, and the 4 sound wave blades were once again destroyed. This golden condor was a heaven soul, yet the force of its attack had far surpassed that level. It was very possible that it was an Emperor tier, or even Monarch tier. Thus, to say nothing of how the Empress and Qingyue would not be a match for it, even Ling Han could not possibly match it if he did not use the great clash of source powers. "Get down here!" Ling Han shouted at the skies. The regulations of gravity here were too chaotic, so he could not fly. The golden condor paid no attention to it, and merely circled around in the skies, occasionally releasing another sound wave blade. After repeating this for quite a few times, the golden condor finally understood that this could not possibly kill Ling Han. Then, with a flap of its wings, it streaked through the skies. This time, it did not fly back after flying off. Ling Han and the others were very displeased. Though they had not sustained any damage, they were naturally irritated after having a feathery animal attack them repeatedly for so many times when they could not counter for the whole while. Unfortunately, aside from winged creatures, there was no one that could fly here. They could do nothing but stare helplessly. "Humph, make sure Qingyue doesn't find its lair, or Qingyue will tear it apart," Qingyue fumed. The 4 of them continued on their way. They did not enter the forest. Who knew what was living inside it? In a mystery realm, one had to be careful at all times because there were some dangers that came from a great many negligible creatures. For example, bugs. They clearly did not have any cultivation level, but were capable of easily piercing through the defenses of elites and injecting fatal poison. And there were also unremarkable weeds that had sawtooth-shaped leaves that could render even the defenses of immortal palace-tier elites ineffective. These leaves also had powerful poison, and could kill one easily and imperceptibly. For another example, there were sharp rock spikes on the ground, completely indestructible and with a murderous aura that could destroy vital signs. Thus, if one could avoid going into such unknown surroundings, it was best not to. "Roar!" A beast's roar rang out, and a massive black bear walked out from the rocks. It was as tall as 30 meters, flames burning in its eyes, seeming very formidable. "Qingyue goes!" Qingyue was excited at the sight of it, and was the first to rush out. "We're having bear paws for lunch!" "Pun!" She had just pounced out when a human figure streaked past, crashed into the rock behind them, and slid down with a creak. This great black bear stood on its hind legs, and was still maintaining the position of delivering a paw strike. A one being struck flying back naturally could only be Qingyue. "Ow, ow, ow!" Qingyue gritted her teeth, and struggled out of the rock. She had been forcefully embedded into the rock, the impact so harsh that it seemed like all the bones in her body had been crushed. "What a strong bear paw, but it should be very delicious!" She leaped up, and charged off to attack the black bear again. The great black bear used the same move, and still delivered a paw strike. However, while Qingyue might look unreliable, her battle perception was extremely high, so how could she possibly fall for the same thing twice? With a turn of her figure, she began circling around the great black bear, making maximum use of her agility. What was a rock? As a bird, it could cross 90,000 miles with a single flap of its wings, and its cry rang out through the skies. It was one of the representatives of extreme speed in this world. At this instant, Qingyue's images were scattered throughout the area, at least 100 of them. This was because her speed was too high, leaving behind afterimages that looked almost real. Come on, big guy. Qingyue is definitely going to munch on your bear paw. The bear paw was constantly in her thoughts. This was the obsession of a glutton. The great black bear snarled. Its cultivation level had already reached the heaven soul, and it itself was a king tier. In terms of strength, it was far superior to Qingyue. But the problem here was it could not hit its target at all, so what was the use of its strong battle prowess? Pun! 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 Qingyue, on the other hand, kept delivering palm strikes and punches consistently against the black bear. Though she looked pure and cute, she was absolutely harsh and heavy in her attacks. This great black bear was endlessly crying out because of her assault, the flames in its eyes turning into a ball-like form. These two fireballs had been blazing red at first, but they were actually slowly turning darker, and occasionally, a white-colored pattern would appear on them, which appeared very bizarre. A sense of foreboding rose up in Ling Han's heart, and he exclaimed, "Qingyue, be careful, never mind, I'll do it." "No, Qingyue still wants to play." Qingyue giggled, and continued to attack the great black bear. Boom! Just at this moment, those two dark-colored balls of light suddenly exploded, turning into a terrifying shock wave. Boom! The surroundings in diameter of 10 miles were all turned into an ocean of flames. There was frightening regulations of fire wreaking havoc there, wanting to burn everything down. Ling Han withdrew his hand. Just now, he had managed to move in time, standing guard in front of the Empress and bewitching maiden Ro, but as for Qingyue... "Qingyue is fine!" Qingyue giggled. There was a light shield around her. It was a rock that was about to surface from the water, flap its wings, and fly. With a soft exclamation from her, this rock flew out, moving to suppress the great black bear. Pun! With a crash, the black bear immediately stumbled, and almost tripped. This was the little girl having awakened the bloodline of the rock, but even such a powerful move only made the great black bear stumble, but did not injure it, which showed that the great black bear's strength was really powerful. "Attack together!" Ling Han, the Empress, and bewitching maiden Ro all charged over, ganging up on this great black bear with their combined efforts. If Ling Han did not use the great clash of source powers, even he could not be a match for this great black bear. Even if the four of them worked together, that would only be barely enough. They would only be capable of managing a tie. However, Ling Han's physique was tough enough, and could completely bear the attack of the great black bear. With him focusing on the assault, tightly attracting all the attack power of the great black bear, the three women were allowed to completely unleash the full force of their assault. After wearing it out for 2 days, they finally managed to kill this great black bear. They all slumped onto the ground, feeling extremely tired. After panting a few times, they all laughed loudly, feeling a happiness they could not describe. Using their own actual strength to kill a fierce beast stronger than themselves gave a very strong feeling of accomplishment. Bear paw! Bear paw! Only Qingyue was extraordinarily energetic. She surveyed the great black bear very happily, her drool dripping. Ling Han rested for a while, and then dismembered the great black bear. The 4 bear paws were barbecued on the bonfire, and it was just enough for each of them to have one. The meat of a heaven soul immortal beast was very delicious in the first place, what more when it was something as fine as bear paw. "Here's another dragon crystal." He drew out a red dragon crystal from within the brain of the great black bear. There seems to be some kind of design on it." Bewitching maiden Ro's eyes were quite sharp. The Empress took it over for a look, and soon nodded. "There is a design, and it has a strong regularity in its pattern, but I can't tell what exactly it is." Ling Han also took it over for observation. This dragon crystal was indeed different from the one that they had gotten previously. There was a very complex vein pattern on the surface, but it was definitely not seals of great Dao. Ling Han was completely able to confirm that fact. Chapter 2056 A Great River Blocks the Path. Chapter 2056 A Great River Blocks the Path. Ling Han put this strange dragon crystal away, and they continued forwards. He could study it slowly, and there was no need to rush things now. 4 hours later, they encountered another fierce beast, but its strength was much lower. After they killed it, they very naturally obtained another dragon crystal. However, this was a very normal dragon crystal, and there were no strange patterns on it. Could it be that only stronger creatures would produce this kind of patterned dragon crystal? They guessed. This was very easily verified because they encountered a colossal creature not too long after. This was a massive tortoise, and it was slowly crawling in the mountains. However, every step of its feet would cause the mountains and earth to shake, creating an astonishing commotion. Boom! This massive tortoise immediately discovered Ling Han and his group, and immediately placed down a clawed leg. It was like a mountain peak had descended, causing the winds to whistle sharply, and there was a yellow-colored seal glowing beneath its claws. If this seal had not been there, Ling Han and his group could have chosen not to dodge, and just allowed it to land on them. No matter how great its power was, it would be useless as it could not harm them at all. At most, they would only be buried into the ground, or simply create a hole in its own foot, as if Ling Han and his group were nails. In front of regulations, pure power was like pure paste, completely meaningless. Thus, all Celestials had to cultivate regulations. It was a different story when power had been fused with regulations. That would create a frightening impact. With the support of regulations, power would also unleash the destructive force that it should have. Ling Han shouted, and raised a fist to parry. Boom! A loud bang rang out, and the tortoise's foot landed. Nothing could block its course. When the tortoise's foot rose again, Ling Han and his party were all embedded in the ground, but all of them were completely unwounded. This was because Ling Han had stretched out a shield of origin power, which had cancelled out the impact caused by this stomp from the giant tortoise. Otherwise, aside from Ling Han, the other 3 women would be throwing up blood. In the case of bewitching Maiden Ro, who was too weak, it was not impossible that she would be directly stomped into mush, either. Boom! The giant tortoise's foot had just risen when it was again descending at a frighteningly rapid speed. It was clearly going to stomp repeatedly, and stomp Ling Han and his group into bits. Who asked you to be arrogant? Ling Han summoned the divine demon's sword. Man and sword fused as one, and shot into the skies. Pooh! A spurt of blood sprayed out, and Ling Han forcefully ripped open the giant tortoise's tough hide, penetrating through the sole of its foot. The divine demon's sword unleashed a blazing light, continuing to slash towards the giant tortoise's head. The giant tortoise released a pained roar. With its size, this stab wound from Ling Han was actually no different from being pricked by a needle. It would naturally hurt, but it would only be a momentary pain. But who asked it to have been created by the divine demon's sword? This was a future celestial tool, so how overbearing would its destructive force be? At this moment, the murderous aura was wreaking havoc inside the giant tortoise's body. As it surged, the adjacent part of blood and flesh would immediately lose vitality, and turn into a mound of dead flesh. Fortunately, the giant tortoise was big enough, and could lay down layer after layer of defenses in its body, so the murderous aura left behind by the divine demon's sword was continuously weakened, and ultimately disappeared. However, it had already turned 1/3 of the giant tortoise's physical body into rotting flesh, showing adequately how terrifying the divine demon's sword could be. Ling Han wielded his sword and slashed over. Shwa, 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 the divine demon's sword danced madly. This giant tortoise was huge, and had terrifying power. If it had been any other person that had encountered it, they would have been really unfortunate. But if it was Ling Han, it would be this giant tortoise that was down on its luck. Its massive body had instead become a very clear target. No matter how Ling Han brandished his sword, he would be able to succeed, so this big guy was soon sprawled out on the ground, turning into a dead tortoise. Cracking its head open, they found a dirt yellow dragon crystal. Upon closer examination, it was covered with patterns. This was another special dragon crystal. The patterns are different, Ling Han said after studying it for a while. The 3 women all nodded. Though the patterns were complex, and an ordinary person would become dizzy from the sight, This group would be able to completely memorize every single detail of the vein pattern. These weren't seals of great Tao that would be slowly erased from their memory by the heaven and earth after a single glance. Who cares? Let's go, Qingyue said casually. Indeed, they could not distinguish anything, so their only option was to continue forwards. As they headed towards that divine dragon mountain, they killed many more wild beasts on their way. Some gave them ordinary dragon crystals, while others produced special dragon crystals. All in all, they obtained a lot of normal dragon crystals, about 10 times the number of special dragon crystals. After spending a full month, they were finally close to approaching that divine dragon mountain, but their path forwards had disappeared, and they could only stop and stand there. There was no further path, as a massive river had blocked their advance. The river flow was extraordinarily wide. At least, it was not something that anyone could cross with a single leap. Then cross the bridge in a vessel? Ling Han tried to take out the wooden ship stored in the Black Tower, but the moment he tossed it into the river, it was completely corroded. There were multiple seals of great Tao surging in the river waters, and it was these seals of great Tao that easily destroyed the wooden ship. The wooden ship could not survive, and neither could a metal one. Nothing could hold up against the corrosive abilities of the river waters. Perhaps divine metal could, but who would use divine metal to build a ship? Wasn't that a massive waste? Let's walk around. Perhaps there is a bridge, or perhaps we would reach the source. They walked along the great river, and passed a great many people on their way. They also encountered a considerable number of people that had walked over from the opposite direction, and this gave Ling Han and his group a sense of foreboding. Perhaps this river flowed in a circle around the entire Divine Dragon Mountain. In that case, they could not possibly walk to the source no matter how much they walked. But without walking a whole round, who would give up? This round was astonishingly huge, and they had walked for a total of 17 days before Ling Han and his party finally returned to where they had originally come from. As expected, the great river was closed, and no path was left. How were they supposed to cross the river then? Wait, no! Ling Han suddenly recalled that he had indeed seen many people as he walked along the great river, but there was also a great many people that he had not seen, like those few super Monarch tears. In fact, he had not encountered Du Xiaojun, Long But Yin, and the others either. Could it be that these people had been walking ahead of them all this while, and that was why they had not met them all this while? Let's walk another round. This time, Ling Han and his party chose to walk around in the opposite direction. True enough, there were a great many people that had been advancing in the same direction as Ling Han and his group previously, and that was why they had not met. However, now that they had circled around in the opposite direction, they had spotted them, but Tian, Qingyue, Yu Huaqing, and the others were still not to be seen. There must be a path that leads to Divine Dragon Mountain here. Thus, those people have all gone to a different location, and have not come here to waste time, Ling Han concluded. But where would the other pathway be? With a thought from Ling Han, he drew out those special dragon crystals, and examined them closely once more. When these vein patterns are put together, isn't it a map? His mind suddenly buzzed with an idea. Map? What map? Bewitching Maiden Ro asked, just trying to strike up a conversation. Everyone speaks of wanting to ascend Divine Dragon Mountain, but with the great river blocking the way, there is no way to advance at all. Perhaps there is an underground passage that can let us cross the river? Ling Han asked. Then we'll dig our own. Qingyue was energized now. In her eyes, this was something very fun. The little girl was the type to do as she said. However, she had only dug downwards a little when the river waters flowed out. If it were not for the fact that Ling Han had moved fast enough, and grabbed the little girl, whom he quickly tossed to one side, she would probably have been corroded by the river waters. Chapter 2057 Halfway Snatched. Chapter 2057 Halfway Snatched. What evil river waters! Almost hurt Nyo! Qingyue was abruptly angered, furious at the river waters. Ling Han smiled, and walked forwards as he held Qingyue's hand. Come on! Let's kill some more wild beasts. They began a hunting trip. Very soon, This made Qingyue elated again because the little girl had food again. As a glutton, what else could she ask for? One after another, wild beasts collapsed at their feet, producing a large number of dragon crystals for them. Though the majority was ordinary dragon crystals, this thing was still very nutritious, and had the amazing effect of aiding them in increasing their comprehension. Who would complain about having too many? Worst come to worst, they could always sell them in exchange for star stones. They obtained more and more special dragon crystals, but it was still far from the map that Ling Han had spoken of. At least for now, it was still a mess, and there was absolutely no way to piece them together. Here's another big guy! 2 months later, they arrived at a small hill. There was a golden lion ahead of them, but it had 3 tails. Upon closer look, each tail actually also bore a head, though they were much smaller and weren't very obvious. What kind of monster was this? Who cares what kind of monster it is? We'll kill it and eat it! Qingyue cried out, and was the first to charge out. Ling Han, the Empress, and bewitching maiden Ro also hurriedly pursued. The coordination among the 4 of them was getting more and more tacit by now. When they joined forces, they could deal with even Heaven's Soul Emperators. After all, intelligence was a clear weakness of the wild beasts here. They could be easily led around by the noise. Their superior battle prowess was all for naught, and there was no need to be afraid. The 4 of them besieged it, but still spent close to 8 hours before finally dealing with this big guy. Ling Han had already gone a very long time without using the great clash of source powers, because he also wanted the 3 women to toughen up as well. Source power was naturally best trained in actual battle. There's a big guy here! A voice filled with pleased surprise rang out. A group of 7 appeared, and when they discovered that Ling Han and his group were here, they all revealed malevolent expressions. Ling Han's eyes swept over this group, and couldn't help but feel surprised because there was actually a person that he knew among this group of 7. Ruan Dongxiang. Strange. Why did he see this guy wherever he went? A yellow-robed middle-aged man stepped out from the group of 7, and arrogantly demanded, "You guys can scram now!" When his gaze swept over Qingyue and the other women, his eyes lit up, and he looked stunned, but did not say something along the lines of demanding that the 3 women stay behind. After all, with them being able to kill such a large monster, the strength of these 4 people was definitely extraordinary. If they could avoid conflict, it was best to. Ruan Dongxiang glared hatefully at Ling Han, but he had only managed to join this team by shamelessly currying favor with them, so how could he possibly dare to cause a conflict between these people because of personal grudges? He only prayed secretly that Ling Han would not be willing to compromise. In that case, even if both sides didn't want a battle, there would be no other option. I don't know how to. Why don't you demonstrate by scramming first for our entertainment? Ling Han said, smiling slightly. If others do not offend me, neither will I offend others. But if they do, I will definitely beat them silly. The yellow-robed middle-aged man was momentarily stunned, and then showed a menacing expression. At first I wanted to let you guys live, but you have such a bad mouth, and are so determined to seek your own death. What are you being so fierce for, ugly? Come over if you dare, and see how Nyo will deal with you. Qingyue rolled up her sleeves, revealing a pair of forearms as fair as jade, instantly drawing the eyes of the 7. Amazing beyond words and remarkably beautiful. A green-robed man approached from the group of 7, and said to the yellow-robed middle-aged man, "Brother Liu, we don't have to kill these 3 girls, right? If we can capture them, go ahead. If they cannot be captured, we can only kill them." The yellow-robed middle-aged man's expression was vicious. If they were of a mind to capture them alive, they would definitely have reservations when they attacked. Meanwhile, the 4 people on the other side had been able to kill a giant-sized wild beast, so their strength could not be weak. Thus, even though they had more in numbers, the moment they had reservations in their attacks, it was very easy for the tables to turn on them. That was why he had said they could capture them if it was possible for them to be captured. If they could not, then they could only kill them. Even if they're dead, don't waste them. I have a use for them. A man in black said. His face was thin and wizened like an old man's, but this was clearly a place only people below 10 million years old could enter. He had probably cultivated some kind of evil cultivation technique which caused this kind of change in his body. Hearing him say these words, even his companions showed expressions of disgust. They knew very well that when this man was cultivating or sleeping, he would be embracing a dead body. He was practically a monster. However, this man's strength was also incredible. Otherwise, they would not have brought him by their side. Merely looking at this kind of person would cause one's eyes to hurt. The Empress revealed a menacing expression. With her pride, she felt that everyone in this world should grovel beneath her feet, but now someone actually dared to disrespect her. She was naturally angered at this. At first, I just planned to teach you a lesson. After all, we do not have any kind of serious enmity between us, but now. Ling Han paused, his killing intent beginning to flow out. Charge! 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 The yellow-robed middle-aged man shouted loudly. Instantly, the 7 of them leaped out at the same time, launching an offensive towards Ling Han and his group. Ruan Dongxiang's expression was filled with malevolence, and a sliver of delight was present in his gaze. On the way here, he clearly knew that these 6 companions were all peak-stage heaven souls. Though they had not even reached the extent of being a king tier, there were as many as 6 of them here. How huge would their battle prowess together be? Even the strongest in Ling Han and his party was only at Yang Soul. Even if he was a monarch tier, he could only be invincible against an earth soul. How could they match those at the heaven soul? What more the peak stage of the heaven soul? In a battle of 6 against 4, that naturally would mean a sure victory. He was also very impressed with himself. He had finally found very strong backers, and would only need to cheer them on from the sidelines in any moment of trouble. Trash, accept your deaths. Qingyue leaped out, and struck violently. However, if it was her alone, she was far from being a match for these 6 people. Very soon, she was blasted back. Ling Han, help Neo, the little girl said. All right. Ling Han replied with a smile, and charged out, the Empress by his side. Bewitching Maiden Ro, however, did not join the battle. She could deal with a wild beast that did not have much intelligence, but against a human opponent, her weakness would be immediately exposed. Whichever one she was targeted by would be able to easily kill her, or even capture her. Thus, her best choice was to flee as far away as she could, and not join in on this excitement. A great battle began, and soon reached the boiling point. They had all released their respective divided souls. Yan's soul would only have a single divided soul, while Heaven's soul had as many as 4. The 6 people on the opposing side could manifest 30 figures altogether, and with them ganging up on Ling Han and his group that had 3 people with 6 bodies, the advantage in numbers was extremely obvious. The Empress gave a clear cry, and the power of her bloodline activated. Instantly, there were additional 18 doppelgangers, which provided considerable compensation for their shortage of numbers. However, it did not affect any kind of qualitative change in terms of actual strength. Fight, fight, fight. Ling Han did not use the great clash of source powers, but he did cast the other celestial techniques one after another. His real enjoyment lay in fighting human opponents. After all, wild beasts were too dumb. He used the regulations of time, and slowed down the attacks of their enemies respectively. Then, he used the regulations of space. Not only did his figure move gracefully, he would also occasionally banish the attacks of his opponents, repeatedly helping the Empress and Qingyue out of danger. Kill the man first! The 6 people on the opposing side could tell that if they did not kill Ling Han first, there would be absolutely no possibility that they could defeat Ling Han and his party. Ling Han was unafraid. If they all came to attack him, then what difference would these 6 people have compared with the wild beasts that the 4 had previously encountered? Like this, Qingyue and the Empress would be able to unleash their full battle prowess. Chapter 2058 You Dare Deceive Me. Chapter 2058 You Dare Deceive Me. In the eyes of the yellow-robed middle-aged man and the others, Ling Han was the largest threat, and had to be killed at the first possible moment. Otherwise, not only would it endanger their lives, the Empress and Qingyue would also have insurance for their lives, and could not be easily gotten rid of. But if Ling Han was killed first, they would eliminate a great enemy. In that case, not only would they be able to win, it was even possible that they could capture the Empress and Qingyue alive. If they had the chance, they naturally wanted to get intimate with them. After all, these two women were extraordinarily beautiful. In their eyes, if the six of them worked together, they would definitely be able to take Ling Han down. After all, the gap between the cultivation levels of both sides was apparent. This was applicable in most situations, but only against Ling Han was it ineffective. The toughness of his physique had reached a freakish level, and it was not something that any dividing soul tear could penetrate. Pun! 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 Under the combined barrage of 6 cultivators at the peak stage of Heaven's Soul, Ling Han continuously attacked. There were some attacks that he had indeed not managed to dodge, and there were some he did not even bother to. This physique allowed him to be as willful as he liked. His fists pounded repeatedly, so fast that it could not be described with words. How's it possible? The speed which he punches at least 3 times faster than ours. He alone can completely block the attacks of 3 people altogether. Freak! The yellow-robed middle-aged man and the others were all dumbfounded. It was obvious that Ling Han's battle prowess was inferior to theirs, yet the speed at which he attacked was astonishingly fast, with him completely blocking the combined attacks of 3 of their members. Though there were still 3 other people whose attacks were effective, some of the attacks would be dodged by Ling Han, and he would take on other attacks head-on. Thus, the 6 of them ganging up on him was practically useless. On the other hand, the Empress and Qingyue were continuously causing damage to them. Though it was not fatal, if their injuries continued to accumulate, it would ultimately cause a qualitative change. Forget about this brat. Let's kill those 2 women first, the yellow-robed middle-aged man called out loudly. At this instant, he did not have any further ****. Compared to his own life and future, what were mere women worth? As long as he was still alive, and as long as he had status, what beautiful woman would not come easily at just a wave of his hand? He was very clear about his priorities. The other 5 all agreed, and changed the target of their attacks. This time, it had returned to the previous situation. Ling Han was using the regulations of space and time to distribute the force of attack on the 2 women. However, in this manner, the battle entered once more into a stalemate. Yuan Dongxiang looked towards bewitching Maiden Ro, his eyes shining viciously. He was naturally stunned by Ling Han's strength. 3 mere Yang souls were actually capable of blocking 6 heaven souls. This was practically inconceivable. But now that things had progressed thus far, what time did he have to be stunned? He was sure that he would lose his life if it was Ling Han's side that won. Thus, he had locked on to bewitching Maiden Ro. Why had he not gone into battle? That was because he was too weak, so even if he did go into battle, he would only be in the way. Then, similarly, the reason why bewitching Maiden Ro had not gone on stage was also because she was weaker. If even Ling Han and the others were only Yang souls, then bewitching Maiden Ro could only be at Yang soul 2 at most. He was an earth soul, and also had the aptitude of a king tier. He could be invincible in this cultivation level. Thus, if he faced off against bewitching Maiden Ro, he would definitely be able to win easily. If he captured this seductive woman, Ling Han and the others would definitely lose their cool, and subsequently, it would naturally lead to a complete defeat. He showed a cold smirk. Don't think that he could be underestimated just because he was weak. On the contrary, his intelligence was the highest, and they would only be able to win by depending on him. Yuan Dongxiang leaped out, and charged towards bewitching Maiden Ro. Immediately, bewitching Maiden Ro looked pitiful and said, "Please don't hurt me. I am willing to do anything for you." Immediately, Yuan Dongxiang's heart beat wildly. Bewitching Maiden Ro was extremely alluring, and when she pleaded with him softly, he could feel his bones practically melt. Furthermore, anything caused his imagination to run wildly. Bewitching Maiden Ro walked towards him in an incredibly seductive manner, her slender waist swaying left and right, showing off an endless grace and sexual appeal. Ruan Dongxiang was completely captivated. He clearly knew that this was inappropriate, but he subjectively enjoyed this scene incredibly, and had no desire to make any kind of reaction at all. "Idiot!" A voice filled with mockery rang out, and Ruan Dongxiang felt a pain in his chest. He hurriedly got out of the way, and shockingly discovered that there was a sharp blade stuck in his chest that had pierced it right above his heart. If he had not stepped slightly to the side when he experienced pain, his heart would probably have burst by now. To dividing soul tirelites, while the heart bursting would not cause death, it would still cause a great damage because the life force of the cultivator was gathered in the heart's blood. Any loss would cause great injury. He was furious and hateful as he harshly exclaimed, "Witch, you dare deceive me!" Bewitching Maiden Rose showed a regretful expression. At first, she had wanted to pierce the top of Ruan Dongxiang's head and shatter his mind, making a fatal strike. However, this position was too sensitive. She feared that the moment she raised her dagger, the other party would immediately become alert, so stabbing the heart bore a higher guarantee of success. This was also because her charm techniques were not skillful enough. Otherwise, even if she stabbed aiming for his mind, Ruan Dongxiang would probably just wait for death with a smile on his face. "I am a deceiving witch in the first place, so what?" Bewitching Maiden Rose scoffed. Ruan Dongxiang's hand covered his chest. He was presently suppressing his injuries. The other party had used a 4-star pseudo-celestial tool, and the injury caused by this stab was not something that could be easily recovered from. Even if it had not truly stabbed into his heart, it was still enough to cause his battle prowess to drop massively. "Even if I am injured, I can still kill you easily," he shouted, his eyes bloodshot as he charged towards Bewitching Maiden Ro. "In your dreams?" Bewitching Maiden Ro retorted with disdain. This kind of man that would only bully, delicate women was the most disgraceful type. Boom! 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 The two of them also began to fight. At first, Ruan Dongxiang should have been able to enjoy an absolute advantage, but because he had sustained an injury, his battle prowess had dropped greatly. Thus, even though he still had the upper hand, if he wanted to capture or even kill Bewitching Maiden Ro, it was not something that could be done quickly. Fires of rage burnt in his heart, and he no longer concerned himself with the situation going on between Ling Han's group and his 6 companions. All he wanted to do now was to capture Bewitching Maiden Ro. He swore that if he captured Bewitching Maiden Ro alive, he was going to *** her till death. If she died, he was still going to *** her. Throughout his life, he had never been deceived by any woman before, and he had even sustained a serious injury because of this. Under his powerful offensive, Bewitching Maiden Ro's situation became worse and worse. She was completely suppressed, and could not even manage a single counter. Even defending herself was very straining on her. "Ha ha ha, let's see how you will dodge this move!" Ruan Dongxiang finally forced Bewitching Maiden Ro into a corner. He was extremely pleased as he delivered a palm strike right at Bewitching Maiden Ro's *****. Not only was he going to capture this woman, he was going to ravage her as well. His palm descended, and when the distance was visibly drawing closer between him and those towering breasts, a grin of satisfaction appeared at the corners of his lips. His betrothed had run off with another man, and this was a thorn in his heart. Yet now, he could play with the woman belonging to another man, which made him feel a perverse kind of satisfaction. Squeeze them to the point they burst. His eyes burned with fire, and his palm grabbed out without the slightest bit of mercy. Pa, the palm landed. That's not right. Why is it completely empty? Ruan Dongxiang astonishingly discovered that his wrist had actually been grabbed by someone else, and he had not managed to lay his palm on those impressive breasts of Bewitching Maiden Ro. The person that had grabbed him was Ling Han. Hadn't this guy been embroiled in an intense battle with the others? Gasp! Ruan Dongxiang immediately came to a realization. He turned his head again, and saw that the yellow-robed middle-aged man and the others had already been defeated. Some had been sliced into half, while some into 6 pieces, and some had even been turned into a pile of mush without even a single complete bone left to be seen. With a shudder, he felt his legs grow weak. Chapter 2059 Transfer. Chapter 2059 Transfer. What was going on? Just now, they had still been battling intensely, yet now the battle had already ended. Ruan Dongxiang pondered deeply, and his expression involuntarily changed drastically. It had not been just a while. The power gap between himself and Bewitching Maiden Ro was not very big, so when he had completely suppressed Bewitching Maiden Ro, it had at least been after 1,000 to 2,000 moves. How long would that need? They had taken their own sweet time. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "To be a man that bullies women, don't you feel embarrassed?" What do you want to do?" Ruan Dongxiang asked in a trembling voice. "Poke your eyes out," Bewitching Maiden Ro declared furiously. She stretched out her right hand and stabbed into Ruan Dongxiang's eyes. "Ah!" Ruan Dongxiang wailed in pain. Though she had not blinded him, it was still overwhelmingly painful. Bewitching Maiden Ro's fury still did not decrease, with her striking Ruan Dongxiang repeatedly. This guy actually almost killed her, and even dared to think of touching her breasts. He was too despicable. "What's the point of speaking such nonsense with him? Just kill him!" Qingyue exclaimed. No, don't kill me!" Ruan Dongxiang exclaimed. "I can give you anything. I beg you, don't kill me! I don't need anything!" Ling Han shot out a punch. Bang! Ruan Dongxiang exploded into a shower of blood. "It's not a divided soul this time, right?" Bewitching Maiden Ro asked. Ling Han sensed for a while, and then nodded. "It's not a divided soul. It's the main body." He walked back, and took away the spatial god tools belonging to the yellow-robed middle-aged man and his companions. When he opened them, aside from ordinary dragon crystals, there were also some special dragon crystals. Clearly, they also knew the use of the special dragon crystals, and that was why they had demanded that Ling Han and his group leave behind the corpse of that golden lion. "Looks like a great many people know the use of the special dragon crystals." Ling Han and his group did not know, because Fuyu himself did not know. As for Du Xiaojun, he probably knew as well. After all, he was a native of Universal Peace Heaven, and he had not told Ling Han, probably not because he did not want to, but rather because he did not know that Ling Han was not knowledgeable about the situation in here. One asked no questions, whereas the other explained nothing, leading to the present situation. "Looks like we are heading in the right direction. The special dragon crystals can help us find the path that breaks through the great river." They continued wandering and hunting wild beasts, collecting more and more special dragon crystals. When they had reached the critical point, they would then be able to piece these dragon crystals together. One after another, the vein patterns joined together, actually forming the shape of a doorway. However, because they still lacked a little less than half, this doorway was still far from being completed. "Is this a transfer portal?" Ling Han and the others all guessed. It actually wasn't a map. Very possibly. There was nothing much left to say. They continued to hunt fierce beasts, and several months later, Ling Han and his party finally obtained the final special dragon crystal. When Ling Han embedded this dragon crystal in the portal, the dragon crystal door suddenly burst out with bright light. It was the multiple crystals that were shining. All the vein patterns had aligned together, and it was like there was blood flowing in them. Finally, a revolving halo of light appeared in the initially empty space in the middle of the doorway. "It is indeed a transfer portal." Ling Han could sense the strong regulations of space. "Let's go!" They did not hesitate at all, and all of them leaped into the doorway. Every time one person entered, the brightness of the doorway of light would dim a bit, and when the Empress, Qingyue, and Bewitching Maiden Ro had all entered, this doorway of light was close to collapse. It looked like this doorway of light would definitely crumble when Ling Han entered, or maybe after yet another person entered at most. It could only sustain the entrance of so many people. Ling Han naturally wouldn't hesitate. With a single step he entered. Wang, his figure immediately vanished. A while after Ling Han entered, this doorway of light trembled lightly. Pa pa pa. It suddenly shattered, and the dragon crystals shattered all over the ground. If they were picked up and examined, one would discover that these dragon crystals had already turned into dust. Ling Han felt as if he had entered into a quagmire. The absorption ability of the surroundings was astonishingly strong. He clearly had his eyes wide open, but could not see anything at all. He experienced a feeling of weightlessness and helplessness. But it was only an instant, and he immediately felt his whole body become light. He was already at the foot of a tall mountain. When he raised his head, he could only see a steep mountain so high that it towered into the clouds, but he could not see all the way to the top. Divine Dragon Mountain! Realization immediately dawned on him. Though he had only surveyed it from a very long distance before, unlike now when he had directly arrived at the foot of the mountain, how could he not recognize it after seeing it for so many days? What a tall mountain! Qingyue said ruefully. Is our destination at the mountain's summit? Let's go! They began climbing. There was a special regulation of gravity here that did not permit anyone to fly. And if they climbed, the gravity would also become extremely astonishing when they reached a certain height. It was as if they were carrying a star on their back, and every step forwards was very difficult. All four of them were panting, and even Ling Han was not having an easy time. This regulations of gravity varied from person to person. The stronger the person, the stronger the pressure he would experience, and no one would have any kind of advantage. So tired! So tired! Qingyue stuck out her tongue, and simply sprawled out on the ground as she began crawling. Even if she had grown up into an extremely beautiful woman, there was still not much change in her essence. She was still as much of a glutton and as wacky as she had always been. The Empress was much more reserved. Though she was also sweating heavily, she did not seem like she was going to stop for a rest at all, and it was even more impossible that she would copy Qingyue. Ling Han couldn't help but ask, "Why don't you two enter into the Black Tower?" The Empress shook her head, her eyes firm. This was a test for her, and she had to be the one to complete it. Meanwhile, Qingyue said, "This is quite fun." Bewitching Maiden Ro raised her hand. "I want to go in. I want to go in." "You just step aside." Ling Han rolled his eyes at her. Bewitching Maiden Ro couldn't help but twiddle with her fingers plaintively. This unromantic rude burr was really too despicable. They climbed for 5 days, and the scenery at the foot of the mountain was no longer visible at all, leaving behind only white hazy clouds wafting around them. But when they raised their heads, the mountain was still steep and high, and the summit could not be seen. Just how many days would they have to walk on for? "Huh!" Ling Han was suddenly stunned, stopping Qingyue, who had just been about to advance forwards. Naturally, the Empress and Bewitching Maiden Ro, who had been behind, also stopped. Something green had appeared ahead of them. It was too normal for green to appear in the mountains, but the problem was that this green was capable of movement. This was a person. Ling Han and his group all looked astounded. This was a well-built man, having the head of a dragon and a human body. His whiskers were all green in color, and so he looked like a green vine that was capable of movement from afar. "Outsiders, please come with me," this dragon-headed man said. Ling Han and the others exchanged looks. The wild beasts from before only knew to kill, but this guy was actually so polite that they could not figure him out. "Come!" The dragon-headed man crooked a finger again, then turned and left. "Let's follow!" Ling Han only hesitated slightly, and then immediately came to a decision. Qingyue and the Empress naturally would not have any disagreement, and immediately moved to follow. "Why doesn't anyone ask for my opinion?" Bewitching Maiden Ro grumbled, and could only follow behind the other three. As they traveled, the majority of their time was either spent walking on the mountain, or walking around mountain peaks. After walking for about 2 hours, a small town actually appeared ahead of them. All the houses were built from wood, and it was filled with a primitive vibe. Chapter 2060 Azure Dragon Town. Chapter 2060 Azure Dragon Town. There were a considerable number of people in the small town. Some had the head of a dragon with the body of a human, and some had a dragon's body with a human head, but no matter their appearance, their hair was all lush green. And in this town, the regulations of gravity had actually vanished. "Please come with me," the dragon-headed man leading them said again, guiding Ling Han and his party into the town. The entry of 4 outsiders did not cause any commotion. The townspeople were still doing whatever they were doing, looking like they did not realize that a few monsters had come here. They walked all the way to the town square. There was a temple made completely out of logs here, with a green dragon sculpture at the very top. It extended all the way across the entire temple, its dragon whiskers incredibly realistic, as if they were still fluttering as a breeze passed over them. "Please!" The dragon-headed man continued to lead the way, bringing Ling Han and his group to the atrium inside the temple. He finally stopped here. "Please sit for a while, and allow me to ask the elder to come out." Ling Han and the others were completely baffled. They had been brought here by someone they did not know, and he did not even explain anything. Anyone would be completely confused and befuddled. After a while, the dragon-headed man from before returned, but there was an elder following behind him now. This elder had a human head with a dragon's body. His head was bald, so there was no green on his head, but his brows and beard were still green. There seemed to be no escape from the fate of being lush green in color. "I am Na Su." A smile appeared on the elder's face, his eyes radiant with light, exuding a frightening pressure. This was an elite, probably an ascending origin to existence. Ling Han could just vaguely estimate it. "Greetings, senior." Ling Han and the others all bowed in greeting. Na Su raised a hand and said, "It is once again the time for the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm to open. I have been waiting a very long time for this day. Dare I ask, why has Senior summoned us here?" Ling Han asked. Na Su was just about to speak when another old monk walked over. Immediately, his brow wrinkled in a frown. "Amitabha Buddha!" This old monk chanted, and everyone felt their ears vibrate strongly with the chant, and almost passed out. This old monk was also very powerful. "I am Na Kong." The second old monk smiled at Ling Han and his party. "I wish to ask for good karma from you for benefactors. For benefactors, it would be better to form this good karma with me." Na Su hurriedly spoke up, looking like it would be his loss if he did not speak up. Ling Han and the others exchanged looks, even more confused. What on earth was going on here? "If you form this good karma with me, I can help increase the benefits threefold when you get instilled with power by the 100 dragons," Na Kong said. "I promise you that I can increase it fourfold." Na Su was unwilling to back down as well. "Fivefold. Sixfold." The 2 old monks suddenly argued so intensely that their faces and ears were flushed, almost coming to blows. Ling Han and the others were even more confused. Were they having an internal conflict? "Dare I ask, seniors, what exactly is this good karma?" Ling Han asked. As the 2 elderly monks continued their argument, they were also explaining to Ling Han. They would be arguing for 3 lines, and then insert a single line of explanation, and with such scattered words of explanation put together, Ling Han and his party finally found out what was going on. This small town was called Azure Dragon Town, and everyone here had the bloodline of the dragon tribe. However, they had been trapped for generations on this divine dragon mountain, and could not leave. No one knew the reason. Anyways, the moment they descended the mountain, their cultivation would be completely lost, which would be quickly followed by their lifespan running out and death from old age. There was only a single solution, and that was when the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm opened every 100 million years. There were a total of 7 clans in the Azure Dragon Town, and when the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm was open, these 7 great clans would enter into a contest with one another. Whoever attained the first place would be able to obtain a dragon pearl from the Divine Dragon Temple. When they collected 9,999 dragon pearls, they would then be able to summon the Divine Dragon, and bring their whole clan safely out of the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm. Yet the candidates for the contest had to be outsiders. Thus, it had led to the previous argument between Na Su and Na Kong. The so-called good karma was signing an agreement with the clan they were in, and fighting on their behalf in this period of time. As time passed, the number of dragon pearls collected by the 7 great clans was getting closer and closer to the required number, but the number of dragon pearls collected by the clans that Na Su and Na Kong belonged to was the least. Thus, they were also the most anxious, being in urgent need of winning so that they could catch up with the other 5 great clans ahead of them. What they feared was if there was just this one opportunity to leave. No one wanted to be trapped eternally on this divine dragon mountain. Na Su and Na Kong both put out very high offers, hoping that Ling Han and his group could join the clan they were in. No matter how strong Ling Han and his group were, one additional person meant additional power. Ling Han did not agree rashly, but rather chose to wait and see. He could not just agree rashly just by hearing some words from them. What if this contest was incredibly dangerous, and people would easily die? Whatever the case, he had to get a full understanding first. Though Na Kong and Na Su were both very anxious, they could not do anything. They could only arrange accommodations for the 4 of them. However, they each sent out a representative from their clans that could speak well, and would continue to convince Ling Han and his group. All the outsiders had been arranged accommodations inside the divine temple. There was an extremely large courtyard that was especially built to accommodate them. Using regulations of space, it might not look large from the outside, but was a completely different world on the inside. Thus, from the outside, it looked like there were doors built into a wall, and appeared very close together, and also seemed extremely ugly. There were a great many people standing outside, discussing something with one another. Newcomers? Someone spotted Ling Han. Newcomer, come here! A purple-robed young man immediately shouted at Ling Han and his group, bearing a strong tone of command. Ling Han only glanced at him, and asked, "Have your parents not taught you how to speak?" Immediately, the purple-robed young man's eyes were spitting fire, and he looked like he was about to charge at Ling Han. "Brother Bao, calm down! Calm down!" Someone on the sidelines hurriedly played mediator, grabbing tightly onto the purple-robed young man. "Let me go! I am going to teach this guy a lesson!" The purple-robed young man struggled strongly, looking like he was fuming with rage. Ling Han chuckled, and clenching his right hand into a fist, he shot out a punch at the empty air in front of him. Pang! Endless regulations moved, dazzling the universe. After this strike, everyone slanted a glance at Ling Han. So powerful! He was clearly only a young soul, but his battle prowess was actually so strong that it had reached the peak stage of Earth Soul. No, it might have even reached the level of Heaven Soul, the early stage of Heaven Soul. Meanwhile, the purple-robed young man's mouth was gaping widely. However, he could not make a single sound, his expression slightly amusing. "Let me go! Let me go!" After being stunned for a while, he called out again. The person beside him expressed that he was very innocent. That was because he had forgotten to hold the purple-robed young man in his shock. Thus, why was he still saying, "Let me go"? Clearly, the purple-robed young man had gotten a scare from Ling Han, but if he were to give in now, it would be embarrassing, so he could only continue calling out and make it an act. Ling Han broke into a smile, and waved his fist at the purple-robed young man. "Brother!" The purple-robed young man immediately pounced over, and grabbed Ling Han's fist. "You are my dear brother, and your little brother. I have finally found you!" His expression was filled with excitement. Fuck, this guy was a little too shameless, wasn't he? Ling Han shook his head and asked, "What did you call me over for?" Brother, we plan to all join a single clan. That way, we will be able to easily obtain victory, and will not have any loss." The purple-robed young man wore an ingratiating expression. Chapter 2061 Heavenly Dragonbone Ashes. Chapter 2061 Heavenly Dragonbone Ashes. Though this was a trick, it could still be considered a very good strategy. Because as long as they won, they would be rewarded, so what need was there for them to fight to the death? This was a complete waste of time, wasn't it? Ling Han laughed, and nodded. If it could save some trouble, he, too, had no intention to fight intensely with others. The purple-robed young man couldn't help but feel overjoyed, and asked, "Brother, you also think this is a good idea, right? What's your name?" Ling Han asked him. Brother, my name is Bo Luo, the purple-robed young man replied eagerly. Pineapple? Qingyue was immediately infuriated. You are not edible, and you actually dare call yourself Pineapple? Bo Luo felt very aggrieved. It was not he who wanted to be given this name. Who asked him to be born in the Bo clan, and his grandfather just happened to bestow on him the name, Luo, as his given name? However, he did not dare talk back to Qingyue and said, Sister-in-law is right. Sister-in-law has lectured me right. Hearing him address her as sister-in-law, Qingyue was immediately all smiles. She felt that even though this pineapple could not be eaten, he was quite a nice guy still. She patted Bo Luo's shoulder and said, Not bad, lad. You have good awareness. Hearing her call Bo Luo as lad in such a mature tone, the people in the area all could not help but laugh. This little girl's flame of life had clearly not been burning for as long as Bo Luo's, yet she considered herself as an elder. There really wasn't anyone else like that. Yes, yes, yes. Bao Luo nodded non-stop, looking completely like a lackey. Ling Han was also smiling slightly. Laughing, he said, All right. I have decided to join this alliance. Which of you is the leader? You help us register, and then we can find a clan to join together. Got it, Bo Luo replied. Ling Han and his group opened a door in the wall and entered for a rest first. They had obtained a large number of dragon crystals on their journey, and Ling Han had also gotten a considerable number of blooms of Tao, which he could share with Qingyue and the Empress. As for bewitching Maiden Ro, he had completely forgotten about her. However, when it was really time to share the spoils, bewitching Maiden Ro would naturally approach shamelessly, and would practically snatch a few blooms of Tao from his hands. They settled down temporarily, firstly to wait for the arrival of the others, and secondly to wait for the contest between the 7 clans to begin. At first, Ling Han had thought the contest between the 7 great clans was for a spar to take place among the outsiders that each clan had respectively recruited, and whichever side won would naturally be the final victor, but reality was not so simple. They had to enter a region, and the dragon pearls that the 7 clans had to collect were contained within. Every 100 million years, only a single dragon pearl would be born. Why did they have to recruit outsiders? That was because only outsiders could enter into this region. Even the townspeople of Azure Dragon Town did not know exactly what kind of situation they would encounter after entering into this region. That was because what they would see in the end would be an outsider bringing a dragon pearl out of this area, and whichever clan this outsider represented, the dragon pearl would then be obtained by that clan. Ling Han also found Du Xiaojun here, and asked this local about the detailed proceedings of the contest. However, Du Xiaojun was also not very familiar with this. He had only heard the predecessors say that they should not all choose a single side. In fact, joining the side of a strong team might not be a good idea either. This made Ling Han very confused. Why couldn't they all choose one side? In fact, when there was a difference in opinion, joining the strongest side was not a good idea either? Du Xiaojun wasn't very sure either, and also could not figure out what the reason for doing so was. I don't care what others say. In my opinion, the most effort-saving method is for everyone to choose the same clan to join, he said thus. Ling Han also thought that there was nothing wrong with this choice, but since the veterans said this, there had to be a reason for it. The people who were in charge of communicating with the 7 clans were the 4 super monarchs Tian, Qingyue, and the other supreme existences. In the eyes of the people of the universal peace heaven and the surrounding heavenly realms, there was no other that was more qualified than these 4 people. However, those that had personally seen Ling Han and Wuming stimulate the Black Dragon Bridge did not think so, but this portion of people was not large. Thus, they could not influence the opinion of the majority. Ling Han was fine with it, though. In any case, this was not inconsistent with his ideas. Tian, Qingyue and the others did not rashly make any decisions, but rather negotiated with the 7 great clans, choosing the best offer. Since their choice involved the fates of the 7 great clans, they naturally had to get a good price. The treasure that the 7 clans were willing to offer was called Heavenly Dragon Bone Ashes. It was formed from the remaining bones of the ancient heavenly dragon mixed together with dirt, and had been diluted who knew how many times over, but it was precisely because of this that they were able to use it. Otherwise, how could a mere dividing soul tear touch the bones that a celestial king tear had left behind? Merely coming close to it would cause their body to crumble and bones to shatter. What was the use of heavenly dragon bone ashes? It was to multiply the benefits that one would get when the 100 dragons instilled power randomly ranging from double to tenfold. The greater the amplification, the more heavenly dragon bone ashes would naturally be needed, and the heavenly dragon bone ashes was also incredibly precious to the 7 clans. Those were celestial king tier remains, and had been left behind by the elites of the dragon tribe at that. To these people that possessed the bloodline of the dragon tribe, it was naturally even more valuable and beneficial. Thus, if all of them were going to join a single clan, whichever clan would not be able to offer too high a price. Moreover, they weren't dumb either. With so many people joining their clan, it was definitely an assured victory for them, so why would they still have to offer a high price? And the matter was thus stalled like this. In any case, there was still some time before the contest began, so everyone still had the opportunity to bargain. Ling was not concerned about this. He found a local of Azure Dragon Town, and asked about where their heavenly dragon bone ashes had come from. At the beginning, he was only thinking of giving it a try, but he had not expected that these people would actually really tell him. They had been picked up from the mountain. This was just like a mineral ore. When you found this kind of rock, the heavenly dragon bone ashes would be contained inside. Of course, this kind of mineral ore was extremely rare, and there would be competitors as well, the wild beasts in the mountains. They, too, yearned for the heavenly dragon bone ashes as they could help them become stronger. In this place, though there was a clear cultivation hierarchy, whether among the wild beasts or the dragon men, they did not cultivate the regulations of heaven and earth, but those of the unique environment that had been created after 100 divine dragons had died. If they left this 100 dragons mystery realm, then the regulations that they had grasped would be instantly erased. That was because the regulations that they had grasped were not recognized at all by the heaven and earth, and could only be used here. From a certain aspect, they were also cultivators of a different cultivation system, but their cultivation was still based on the regulations of the celestial realm. Thus, they would still gain approval from the heaven and earth to a certain extent. At least, their lifespan would not be severed together with their cultivation. And precisely because of this, there was no need for them to go to a specific location to advance into the severing mundane tier and dividing soul tier. It could completely be done here. It was the same naturally for the immortal palace tier and ascending origin tier, but their highest accomplishment would be capped at the ascending origin tier because this dimension had been formed by a mystical power of a celestial king tier. They could not possibly attain that level, but only reach the level that was below it. In curiosity, Ling decided to walk around in the mountains to see if he could get some heavenly dragon bone ashes. Because the heavenly dragon bone ashes were too difficult to obtain, the townspeople not only told Ling where the heavenly dragon bone ashes could be found, they did not even forbid him from going there. Chapter 2062 Provoking on behalf of the Master. Chapter 2062 Provoking on behalf of the Master. Ling and his group arrived at the area that the townspeople of Azure Dragon Town spoke of. It naturally was in the mountains, and there was a naturally formed canyon here. Both sides were towering, steep mountain cliffs, and as the mountain winds whistled through here, there would be a few rocks occasionally carried by the wind too. If these rocks were blown onto your face, it would ache and be sore. And among these rocks, some would contain heavenly dragon bone ashes. If one was lucky enough to rake some in, that would really be hitting the jackpot. The Empress waved her hand casually, and sucked in all the rocks that flew out to her hand. Then, with a slight tremor, these rocks were all crushed to dust. There were no heavenly dragon bone ashes. If there had been some, these rocks would not have been crushed, as they were as hard as divine metal, not, of course, but they were definitely not inferior to 7 or 8 stars pseudo-divine metal. After all, They contained the bone ashes of a celestial king tier, so how could they not be amazingly strong? Ling Han and his party were just planning on entering the canyon when another group of people came from behind them. The one in the lead was a man of lanky build, and naturally had an intimidating presence to him. It was Tian Qingyue, one of the 4 super monarch tiers of the universal peace heaven. When he saw that Ling Han and his group were also here, a hint of disdain flashed through Tian Qingyue's gaze. He considered himself very noble, so he naturally did not take everyone seriously. Of course, this was also because he had left too quickly, and had not discovered that the Empress and Qingyue had similarly stimulated the Golden Dragon Bridge. Furthermore, Ling Han had even stepped onto the Black Dragon Bridge. That was the most venerable divine path. If he had known, his present attitude would definitely not have been like this. However, when he saw how exquisitely beautiful the Empress and Qingyue were, and how alluring and graceful bewitching Maiden Ro was, even Tian Qingyue's eyes lit up, and he took a second look at Ling Han. This brat's luck with women was practically enough to drive anyone mad with envy. To actually have 3 women who were as beautiful as celestial maidens, each having a different kind of charm, to accompany him. This was really baffling to others, and they could not accept this. Wasn't it just a shame? Not only Tian Qingyue was an arrogant bully, even the 9 lackeys behind him were similarly insufferably obnoxious. They probably thought that now that they had such a powerful backer like Tian Qingyue, everyone else was below their notice. Someone saw the stunned expression that flashed quickly through Tian Qingyue's eyes, and immediately became aware that this was a good opportunity to curry favor with this lord. He stepped out, and in a flash, he already stepped in front of Ling Han and his group, blocking their way forward. However, he did not use force, but rather bowed very courteously and said, "My name is Sikong Hao. Greetings, 3 celestial maidens." 3 celestial maidens? Then what about Ling Han? Sikong Hao had clearly spoken deliberately. He purposely wanted to leave Ling Han out. And if Ling Han was not happy, and wanted a fight, then he'd take the chance to thrash Ling Han harshly so that he would come out of it dejected and depressed. And at that time, Tian Qingyue only had to step in and rebuke him harshly. He could then play the role of a nice guy, and also show off his formidable might. You see, Ling Han could not even match Sikong Hao, but Tian Qingyue was capable of reprimanding the latter harshly, and in an instant, his image would become mighty and noble. For a lackey to go so far, he was actually quite dutiful enough. Ling Han swatted a hand dismissively and said, "A good dog doesn't block the way. Scram! Hee, I don't think I was talking to you, right?" Sikong Hao asked in a contemptuous tone, his expression filled with arrogance. "So how about it? I disdain you." In the distance, Tian Qingyue's steps slowed, and as he slowed, the speed of the 8 people behind him naturally slowed down as well. How could they possibly surpass him? With Tian Qingyue's intelligence, he had naturally guessed what Sikong Hao wanted to do. He couldn't help but smile, and did not stop him. In his opinion, he had not been moved by the Empress and the other women, and merely admired their beauty and grace slightly. Furthermore, he indeed thought that Ling Han was not worthy of the 3 women. Thus, if the Empress and the others could see Ling Han's true face, he thought that he would be helping the 3 women. Of course, he would definitely not show off deliberately. That was too purposeful and low-grade, which he was disdainful of doing. If he, Tian Qingyue, wanted to pursue any woman, who would actually refuse him? Ling Han chuckled and said, "Trash, there is some type of bootlicking that cannot be done casually, because you have no idea how strong the enemy you provoked would be. What you mean is that you are very strong, and I have trifled wrongly with you." Sikong Hao raised a brow, continuing to express his disdain of Ling Han. He wanted nothing more than for Ling Han to make a move. Ling Han nodded. "You are overwhelmingly wrong. A mere young soul, I can suppress you single-handedly." Sikong Hao scoffed. Previously, every person who registered would register their cultivation level, and when they obtained heavenly dragon bone ashes, it would then be distributed according to their respective cultivation levels. You didn't think that everyone would be able to get an equal share of the heavenly dragon bone ashes, right? How could this be possible? Thus, Sikong Hao knew that Ling Han and his party were all only young souls, and he, on the other hand, was a heaven soul, and also had the aptitude of a king tier. Even if Ling Han and his group were monarch tiers, they could only kneel in submission in front of him. What a despicable guy! Let Nyo beat him up! Qingyue declared angrily. Her ferocious nature was on full throttle, and she bared her teeth, showing 2 tiny canines. Ling Han stopped the little girl and said, "Let me. You would not hold up to 3 moves from me." Sikong Hao increased the intensity of his provocation. Ling Han was not angered in the slightest, because it was naturally not worth getting angry at the words of this kind of person. He smiled faintly, and shot out a punch at Sikong Hao. Wang, 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 multiple seals appeared on his right hand, and his punch seemed capable of shattering the universe. "You will collapse at the first blow." Sikong Hao similarly shot out a punch in response. Pun! Their 2 fists crashed into each other, and the light of regulations instantly exploded. Ling Han retreated continuously for 7 steps, and then steadied his footing. With a smile, he retorted, "You're nothing more than this." Sikong Hao did not step back. He had the upper hand in this clash, but his expression did not look happy at all, because this was completely different from the result that he had anticipated. A mere young soul, and he actually had such powerful battle prowess? Even Tian Qingyue showed a hint of seriousness. He would be able to suppress Sikong Hao with a single hand, and even facing Sikong Hao, Ling Han was inferior, so it was even more impossible that the latter was a match for him. But Ling Han was only just slightly inferior to Sikong Hao. This kind of battle prowess was really too astonishing, and even he was no more than this in the past. This was a super monarch tier whose natural talent in cultivation was definitely not inferior to his. Sikong Hao was first taken aback, and then flew into a humiliation-fueled fury. Ling Han actually dared to counter him with sarcastic mockery? Die! With a soft exclamation, Sikong Hao's fists moved continuously. 2, 2, 2, every punch would shoot out a streak of light, and several hundred streaks of light were instantly descending on Ling Han, sealing off every route of retreat that was available to the latter. Just previously, though Sikong Hao had not pulled his punches, he had not used any celestial technique, either. And now, he used shooting star fists, so his battle prowess spiked greatly, so it was still possible to deal with Ling Han in the remaining 2 moves. A vicious glint flashed through Ling Han's eyes. The opponent was actually delivering a fatal strike. "Since you are so merciless to me, then don't think that I will be merciful either. You are the one who has trifled with me in the first place." Great clash of source powers. Boom! Ling Han's whole person was shining, and a frightening brightness surged out from his body, shooting out over the oval-shaped region in front of him. "Not good, step back!" Tian Qingyue was shocked. An attack like this was already comparable to a full-out attack from him, and if Sikong Hao was touched by this kind of attack, he would definitely die immediately. But though his shout was very loud, the problem here was, what time or space did Sikong Hao have left to dodge? Chapter 2063 Battling Tian Qingyue. Chapter 2063 Battling Tian Qingyue. Boom! A blazing light surged past, and a massive turbulence appeared in the regulations of heaven and earth. This was the great clash of source powers. Aside from regulations of earth, the other 4 types of regulations were all intensely clashing. The might that was created from this explosion was incredibly frightening, and also affected the Tao of heaven and earth and the surroundings. Sikong Hao? He had already disappeared, his form and spirit both destroyed in this blow. A great heaven soul king tier, and he actually couldn't withstand a single blow from a young soul. Who could believe that? The iron rules of cultivation had determined that Sikong Hao would have been able to kill Ling Han in 2 to 3 moves, but now the tables were turned. This was extremely inconceivable. How could there be such a powerful young soul? Tian Qingyue's gaze immediately turned harsh, and was covered with a layer of haze. Just now, the fact that Ling Han's performance had been slightly inferior to Sikong Hao's had already made him feel that Ling Han's strength had caught up to his from when he had been at this stage, which also mean that if Ling Han's cultivation level was presently also Heaven's Soul, the two of them would be equals. Of course, Tian Qingyue definitely had strong confidence in himself, and thought that he would still be capable of being slightly superior. But Ling Han actually killed Xikong Hao with a single bow, which was enough to match Tian Qingyue's present strength. This had also shattered his self-confidence. He did not think that he would have been able to do so when he had been a young soul himself. He could not do this, but Ling Han could. So wasn't this difference obvious enough? He was actually inferior to Ling Han, inferior to a guy that he had previously looked down on. He looked down on Ling Han, so wouldn't he have been disdaining himself even more? How dare you! Behind Tian Qingyue, a follower came back out of his shock, and immediately shouted at Ling Han, pointing a finger at him. Not only was he a Heaven's Soul, he was also an Emperor tier. If he was being honest, he was definitely no match for Ling Han's previous explosive attack, but even if he had taken on this attack head-on, he would only have sustained minor injury. It was definitely impossible that he would have been killed. Thus, he had enough confidence to rebuke Ling Han. As long as he could block a few blows from Ling Han, Tian Qingyue naturally would stand up for him. Xikong was only sparring with you, yet you dealt him a deadly attack. That is too cruel, he continued. Oh? Ling Han shook his head. At the beginning, Xikong Hao had indeed merely wanted to humiliate him, but by the second move, he had already shown his killing intent, so how could this possibly still be a spar? You guys want to kick me around, and distort the truth deliberately? I have killed him anyways, so what about it? Ling Han's tone was very forceful. Since you guys were being so overbearing, there was no reason for him to step back, either. A person who kills needs to pay with his life, that follower declared menacingly. Pay with your life. The other followers similarly called out loudly. Tian Qingyue did not speak, but his gaze was very harsh as killing intent surged from him. If Ling Han's battle prowess was only like what it had been at the start, then he would disdain from dealing with Ling Han with how proud he was. That was because it was definitely he that would win in a battle of equal cultivation levels. But now that he had witnessed Ling Han's true battle prowess, Tian Qingyue was not as confident in himself as he had once been. In a battle of equal cultivation levels, he would definitely lose. To say nothing of equal cultivation levels, Ling Han only had to advance into Yin Soul, and he would probably be able to suppress Tian Qingyue. This caused Tian Qingyue's killing intent to blaze madly. As an invincible monarch tier, it was enough that he could not overcome a gap in cultivation level and suppress his superior opponent, and he actually would be the one being suppressed by a weaker opponent. Furthermore, there was a total gap of 2 minor levels. This was completely unacceptable. Could it be that he was only an ordinary cultivator, and Ling Han was an invincible monarch tier? This was really him overthinking things. That was because Ling Han had used the Great Clash of Source Powers. The might would increase accordingly as his cultivation level increased, but it was mainly still restricted to the major tier he was in. The change in battle prowess brought about by a minor level was not very apparent. Thus, even if Ling Han advanced into Yin Soul, he would still be unable to suppress Tian Qingyue easily. Even if he was an Earth Soul, he could not do so. Only after he himself had reached Heaven's Soul would he be able to. No one can kill my people and leave completely without a look back. Tian Qingyue spoke up. You commit suicide. At least you will be able to ensure your corpse is whole. Ling Han laughed loudly. I have just killed a dog that only knows to bark madly. What's the big deal? You are only seeking your own death like this. Tian Qingyue humphed, and in a flash, he already appeared in front of Ling Han. Stretching out his hand, his 5 fingers grabbed out at Ling Han's throat. He was a Heaven's Soul monarch tier. This grab was both quick and ruthless, with frightening power of regulation surging in his strike. Even an Emperor tier at Heaven's Soul would be instantly suppressed by this kind of regulations, being completely destroyed and corrupted. Ling Han did not hesitate the slightest. With his soft exclamation, the Great Clash of Source Powers was activated, and a terrifying storm of energy exploded from his chest. Tian Qingyue had clearly witnessed how terrifying the great clash of source powers could be, yet did not look like he was going to retreat in the slightest. His right hand was still in its original position, tackling the great clash of source powers head-on. Boom! 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 The power of regulation surged out madly, turning into multiple astonishing seals that glowed and dimmed, and were incredibly bright in their brilliance. Ling Han and Tian Qingyue were both sent several hundred meters back, but in the next instant, they both charged back, and an intense exchange of blows unfolded. The heaven and earth were forcibly ripped, showing multiple tears in space. It was like the whole world had become inky black, but every time the two great monarch tears clashed, an incredibly brilliant light would surge out, lighting up the whole universe. Everyone was completely stunned and dazzled by the scene. Had this kind of battle really exploded between two dividing soul tears? It was probable that even the power of Immortal Palace Tear was only like this as well. Those 8 followers of Tian Qingyue felt their scalps grow numb. Their mouths gaped widely, but they could not spit out a single word. This was too stunning. That guy that was fighting on equal terms with Tian Qingyue was only a mere Yang soul. For a Yang soul to be able to match a heaven soul, this was already something that came out of fantasies, and only those very rare super monarch tears like Tian Qingyue and Xia Hotong would be able to do so. But the person that Ling Han was fighting was no ordinary heavenly emperor, but a supreme monarch tear like Tian Qingyue. Monster, he was such a freak. The two great monarch tears battled fiercely. Their figures flashed, and even an ordinary heaven soul would feel their eyes blur and an urge to vomit arise upon seeing this kind of battle. Blood splattered. There was Ling Han's blood, and there was also Tian Qingyue's. The 8 great followers were all astounded. Tian Qingyue had actually sustained injury. This arrogant super monarch tear actually would get injured as well. After exchanging several hundred blows, the two great monarch tears stepped to the side, and were separated by about 60 meters. They faced each other, but made no further move. Tian Qingyue did not make a move, because now he was more familiar with Ling Han than others. This man's physique was practically tough to a chilling extent. Even after sustaining several hundred blows from him, Ling Han had only bled a little. But in Tian Qingyue's case? Though he had not sustained as many blows as Ling Han had, his physique was far from being a match for the other parties, and the injuries he had actually suffered were actually no lighter than what Ling Han had sustained. If they continued the battle, it was possible that he would lose, or even possibly die. This was naturally something that he would definitely not do. And the reason why Ling Han had not made a move was because the exertion of his origin power and spirit was very great, and he could no longer channel the great clash of source powers. Thus, they only faced each other. Lord Tian actually can't do anything to this guy. He is just a mere young soul. Heavens, how could there be such a freak? I am about to go crazy. The 8 followers were all exclaiming in shock while grabbing their heads, filled with absolute disbelief. I will spare your life this once, and will definitely demand it in future, Tian Qingyue declared menacingly. Ha! Ling Han scoffed. In a battle of equal cultivation levels, it would be a piece of cake for me to kill you. Tian Qingyue's aura had weakened, and this was an incredibly striking reality. The space for Ling Han's growth was far superior to his. However, in the blink of an eye, his killing intent blazed again. This kind of terrifying opponent really had to be killed as soon as possible, or there could possibly be no chance to do so in future. And right at this moment, a group of people were walking over to the canyon, and the person in the lead was a captivatingly exquisite and graceful beauty. Chapter 2064 All arrived. Chapter 2064 All arrived. It was Zhu Huiyan. Ling Han had come up with the idea of looking for heavenly dragon bone ashes here, so there was no reason that others would not have the same idea. Wasn't it so? Tian Qingyue had come, and Zhu Huiyan had also arrived. When he saw Zhu Huiyan, Tian Qingyue couldn't help but withdraw his gaze. He had no wish to lose his composure in front of this old rival. Celestial Maiden Zhu, that's him! Behind Zhu Huiyan, A green-robed man pointed at Ling Han. What are you pointing at me for? Ling Han tossed a glare at that person, his gaze a little fierce. It could not be helped. He had just been in a fight, and it was with a powerful enemy like Tian Qingyue at that. His energy was all maintained at the most alert and peak stage. I heard that you say that you stimulated the Black Dragon Bridge? Zhu Huiyan spoke up, directing a question at Ling Han. What? Tian Qingyue exclaimed in spite of himself. How is this possible? The Black Dragon Bridge was also called the most venerable divine path. It had never been trodden by anyone since the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm first appeared. This was also called an impossible miracle, and only the most venerable master of the heaven and earth could manage to conquer it. However, a 9th heaven celestial king would only be equal to the heaven and earth, so how could there possibly emerge a venerate that surpassed the heaven and earth? Tian Qingyue realized that he had lost his composure, and hurriedly shut his mouth. He looked at Ling Han, the jealousy in his eyes even more apparent than before. Though there had never been one before, Tian Qingyue did not think that Zhu Huiyan had made a mistake. Ling Han's strength had reached an inconceivable extent. Even while he was only at young soul, he could match Tian Qingyue. This had far surpassed the capacity of a monarch tier, so it was logical that he had been able to stimulate the most venerable divine path. Why did this kind of honor not belong to him instead? Tian Qingyue clenched his fists tightly, forcibly suppressing the urge to make a move. Meanwhile, Ling Han glanced at Zhu Huiyan. He had not made contact with this female monarch tier before. He nodded and replied, That's right. There were too many people that had witnessed this scene. There was no need for him to hide that fact, nor could he do so. Zhu Huiyan nodded, and then continued, My master has made a prediction before that if the most venerable divine path is stimulated, one can obtain blooms of Tao upon it. I am sure Brother Ling too has obtained a harvest, right? Ling Han's eyes involuntarily narrowed. This woman's master was most likely also a 9th heaven celestial king. At least, he had to be an 8th heaven celestial king. Otherwise, he could not have possibly been able to predict this kind of secret of heaven and earth. Ling Han declined to comment, and only smiled faintly. This had already touched on personal secrets. There was absolutely no need for him to answer this kind of question. I would like to ask Brother Ling to part with some, and sell me 10 blooms of Tao, Zhu Huiyan said. This was really a very large appetite. Ling Han had only obtained 17 blooms of Tao in total, and then after sharing with the 3 women, each person would only have 5 on average. And this Zhu Huiyan demanded 10 from the very start. Even if Ling Han had not shared with the 3 women, after selling to Zhu Huiyan, the number of blooms of Tao in his possession would still be the minority. Most importantly, blooms of Tao were not like dragon crystals, and were even more valuable, so how could their value be measured in starstones? It should be known that this was a treasure that could only be obtained when one stepped onto the Black Dragon Bridge. In a whole epoch, only Ling Han and Wuming had managed to accomplish that. Ling Han shook his head. What bloom of Tao? I have never seen such a thing. Brother Ling, you are really being unfriendly here. Zhu Huiyan's pretty face darkened slightly, not angry but still intimidating. When a monarch tier became angered, even the weather would change. Who do you think you are? The Empress spoke up, an endless dignity rippling out. Though her cultivation level was not very high, her aura was definitely astonishingly strong. It was inborn for her, and no one would be able to copy that even if they wanted to. Zhu Huiyan had already been a little angered, and now a further layer of cold ice came over the expression on her pretty face. She pointed a finger at the Empress, and demanded, You actually dare act insolent towards me? It was you who delivered your own face to ask for a beating. Ling Han countered calmly. I am not in the habit of hitting women, but if you continue to pester me, I will not be reserved, either. Do you think that you can be invincible in this world just because you have stimulated the most venerable divine path? Zhu Huiyan asked in disdain. Cultivation level was a glaring shortcoming. There was a total gap of 3 minor levels between them, and taking into account her status as a monarch tier, that would be 5 levels. What right did Ling Han have to make such a threat? Even if Ling Han had stepped onto the most venerable divine path, he would only be able to surpass 4 levels at most. Zhu Huiyun, don't underestimate this person. Tian Qingyue spoke up, his expression grim. Let's work together, and then we'll share the blooms of Tao between us equally. Zhu Huiyun was taken aback, and then blurted out. You have already exchanged blows with him? If that had not been the case, why else would he have suggested joining forces? Hold on, Tian Qingyue definitely had to have been unable to apprehend Ling Han. Heavens, this guy was only a mere young soul. She had underestimated him, she really had. How could someone who had managed to step onto the most venerable divine path be judged with conventional reasoning? Though Tian Qingyue was not willing to admit it, he firstly wanted to kill Ling Han, and secondly, he also wanted to obtain the blooms of Tao, so after a slight pause, he still nodded his head in admission. Though Zhu Huiyun had long since guessed that, when she saw Tian Qingyue admit it of his own volition, she still couldn't help but feel a jolt in her heart. There was actually such a heaven-defying person in this world. Immediately, a powerful killing intent radiated from her. If she did not get rid of this kind of prodigy, she would not be able to rest easy. Fine, we'll work together to eliminate this person. Her personality was incredibly decisive, and she immediately came to a decision. Tian Qingyue nodded. He couldn't kill Ling Han on his own, but it was highly possible now that Zhu Huiyun was added into the equation they could capture Ling Han, and then forcibly refine Ling Han using regulations like a cauldron. Under the crushing pressure of the Tao of heaven and earth, no matter how tough his physique was, it would be completely useless. The 2 super monarchs both showed an intense killing intent. The number of times they had worked together with another person was pitifully few, what more when it was to deal with a person who was inferior to themselves by 3 minor levels. If this was known to others, there would definitely not be a single person who would believe it. Xiao! Right at this moment, a figure suddenly sped over from the distance. He was moving astonishingly quickly, and there were 2 other people behind him whose speed was similarly overwhelmingly fast. The person at the forefront immediately stopped, and asked Ling Han. What is it? Gotten into some trouble? It was Wuming. Ling Han was just about to speak when he saw the 2 people behind Wuming had also stopped. These 2 people were Xia Hotong and Yu Huaqing. The super monarchs that had entered this space had actually all arrived in unison. Why aren't you running anymore? Xia Hotong asked coldly. These words were directed at Wuming. Wuming glanced at him, and scoffed. I just can't bother myself to tangle with you guys. Did you think I was afraid of you? Hee, what arrogant words! The corners of Yu Huaqing's lips crooked up in a grin, his demeanor very arrogant. Meanwhile, Tian Qingyue and Zhu Huiyun were both a little confused. The 2 great monarchs that were their equals were actually pursuing Wuming together, while the former 2 were presently just planning to join forces to take Ling Han down, and it just so happened that Ling Han and Wuming seemed to know each other. When they mulled this over, it seemed quite strange. Yet Ling Han came to a realization. These 2 people also covet your blooms of Tao. Just 2 clowns, Wuming stated calmly. In the whole world, only Ling Han was worthy of being considered as a rival by him at present. So what if Yu Huaqing's and Xia Hotong's cultivation level was higher than his? In the past, he had been a 9th heaven celestial king, and stood at the apex of the celestial path. He had seen too many so-called supreme prodigies like Yu Huaqing and Xia Hotong, and also killed too many of them, so how could they possibly cause a stir in his heart? Hearing Ling Han say this, Tian Qingyue, Xia Hotong, and the others also came to a realization. As it turned out, their goal was the same. It was just that their targets differed. Then, we won't interfere with each other. Chapter 2065 Battle of Monarch Tears. Chapter 2065 Battle of Monarch Tears. Not to interfere with each other. This was extremely simple. Zhu Huiyun and Tian Qingyue would continue to battle against Ling Han, while Xia Hotong and Yu Huaqing would continue to keep an eye on Wuming. Meanwhile, they would naturally keep their own share of spoils. neither of them would target the other. Agreed, the four monarchs said with a nod. A baleful smile spread across Wuming's face. He had slain many ninth heaven celestial kings in the past, so what were these mere heaven soul cultivators to him? Even though Tian, Qingyue and the others were all regarded as paramount monarchs, their talent was only SOSO in Wuming's eyes. After all, which of them could become a fifth heaven celestial king? Even if they could become an eighth heaven celestial king, this still wasn't enough for Wuming to take them seriously. To challenge his will? Die. Initially, I didn't want to argue with you, trash. However, you people insist on seeking death? Wuming said in a baleful voice. Killing intent exuded from his eyes. You're truly as arrogant as can be, Yu Huaqing said in an icy voice. Enough with the nonsense. Die. Xia Hotong was filled with impatience. In his eyes, a measly earth soul cultivator could be killed with a wave of his hand. If it weren't for the fact that Wuming was so good at fleeing, how could he have survived until now? However, did being good at fleeing represent that he was good at fighting? Naturally not. The two of them immediately lashed out, with their attacks being as vicious as could be. They wanted to kill Wuming with a single blow. This wasn't because they respected Wuming's strength, but it was because they were afraid that he would move first. Thus, they needed to strike first and strike hard. They were going to snatch Wuming's spatial storage tool. After all, they would only trust themselves to go through his spatial storage tool. Fools! Wuming said with a sneer. His body suddenly moved like a flash of light as he charged towards Xia Hotong. Boom! 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 A violent battle immediately erupted. Wuming was truly ferocious, and he was taking the initiative to attack even though he was fighting against two opponents. As he channeled his celestial techniques, his battle prowess was as overwhelming as the heavens. Even though he was at a numerical disadvantage, he wasn't being suppressed at all. This naturally astounded Xia Hotong and Yu Huaqing. Just like how Tian Qingyue had been stunned by Ling Han just then, the two of them hadn't imagined that a yang soul cultivator could possibly be so powerful. However, they immediately composed themselves after a few exchanges. Wuming was indeed powerful. However, he was still limited by his cultivation level. In fact, he was only so powerful because of his intricate grasp of regulations. Because of this, he could unleash greater power from celestial techniques. Meanwhile, the celestial techniques of his opponents would become noticeably weaker. With his attacks strengthened and the attacks of his opponents weakened, he could surprisingly overcome a disadvantage of 3 minor levels. No. In fact, the combination of Xia Hotong and Yu Huaqing was still slightly more powerful. However, they definitely couldn't suppress and capture Wuming in a short amount of time. Thus, this became an intense battle that wouldn't conclude any time soon. On the other side, Tian Qingyue and Zhu Huiyan were battling against Ling Han. They also couldn't gain a noticeable upper hand, and this was because Ling Han's great clash of source powers could specifically cause great damage and destruction to a certain area. Regardless of how many opponents he faced, anyone who entered the range of this attack would be struck. Thus, as long as Ling Han didn't become exhausted, he could exert a similar amount of pressure on both Tian Qingyue and Zhu Huiyan. Both battles were remarkably intense and vicious. In fact, just a single shock wave from these battles could easily annihilate an ordinary heaven soul cultivator. The spectating followers were deeply shocked by what they saw. Meanwhile, Yu Huaqing and Xia Hotong naturally had their own subordinates as well. However, they had arrived slightly later. Even so, they were still completely stunned by the scenes that welcomed them. The 4 most powerful Yus of the Universal Peace Heaven were actually teaming up to battle against 2 people. Heavens! Who could believe this? Ling Han, let's team up as well, Wuming suddenly said. He was not one to make meaningless remarks. As he finished speaking, he had already launched a palm strike that transformed into 2 black swords that slashed at Tian Qingyue and Zhu Huiyan. Ling Han initially thought that he was hearing things. However, upon seeing Wuming's attack, he naturally wouldn't doubt his own eyes as well. Wuming genuinely wanted to team up with him. Ling Han was astonished, yet this didn't affect his reaction. He also launched 2 punches, activating his great clash of source powers, and unleashing a devastating attack at Tian, Qingyue, and Zhu Huiyan. When Xia Hotong and Yu Huaqing arrived before him, he actively charged forward to block their attacks with his body. Pun pun! The attacks of the 2 Monarch tears struck Ling Han in unison. However, Ling Han was merely sent flying back, and he didn't even spit a single drop of blood. Xia Hotong and Yu Huaqing's eyes widened in shock. Their attacks had struck Ling Han head-on, yet he hadn't even spit a single drop of blood? This was unbelievable. However, they were Monarch tears, after all, so they quickly regained their composure. They continued to charge at Wuming. Just then, they had already agreed not to interfere with each other's battles. They couldn't steal each other's prey. It was pretty much the same with Tian, Qingyue, and Zhu Huiyan, who continued to target Ling Han. However, because of this, Ling Han and Wuming now had a significant advantage. They each had 2 people who wouldn't attack them. Meanwhile, because they had teamed up, they could essentially battle against their opponents 2-on-2. This allowed them to largely eliminate their disadvantage. Let's stop restricting ourselves, Zhu Huiyan roared. Even though she was a woman, she was even more resolute than most men. Let's work together to kill these 2 people. Even though it was 4 against 2 right now, each pair of them was only focusing on their own opponent. Thus, they weren't exactly working together. Agreed, Tian, Qingyue, and the others said with a nod. Monarch tears were naturally resolute people. Upon teaming up, their battle prowess instantly surged by a significant amount. I'll take care of defending. You focus on attacking, Ling Han roared. All right. Wuming immediately replied with a decisive nod. Ling Han summoned his divided soul, and stopped unleashing his great clash of source powers. Instead, he started to act as a human shield, blocking all of his opponent's attacks. Of course, it was naturally impossible to block all of their attacks, but he could still block a large portion of them. With Wuming's strength, he could naturally deal with the attacks that slipped through. With the pressure eased, he could more so draw on his full power to unleash powerful attacks. Just how terrifying was Wuming if he didn't need to focus on his defenses? This was simply indescribable. His battle experience was far superior to that of Tian, Qingyue, and the others. In fact, he was more than 100 million times more experienced. His attacks flowed like water, and there were no crevices that they couldn't enter. His ability to seize opportunities and create opportunities was more so something that Tian, Qingyue, and the others couldn't hope to compare to. Without needing to worry about his defenses, it was as if Wuming had become the sharpest blade in the world. Tian, Qingyue, and the others roared in fury as they felt a devastating pressure sweep over them. Kill him first! They shouted as they glared at Wuming. However, it was a shame that Ling Han was there to block their attacks. Relying on the regulations of time and the regulations of space, he continued to use himself as a human shield, blocking almost all of their attacks. Tian, Qingyue, and the others were completely unable to touch Wuming. Ha ha! Wuming roared with laughter, and his attacks became increasingly smooth and vicious. He was truly a strange person. After teaming up with Ling Han, it was clear that he had placed all of his trust in Ling Han, completely ignoring all of the incoming attacks. He focused his full effort on unleashing powerful attacks. Ling Han couldn't help but feel slightly surprised. However, he also felt extremely thrilled at this moment. Fighting alongside such a partner was truly an amazing feeling. Chapter 2066 Cooperation of Ling Han and Wuming. Chapter 2066 Cooperation of Ling Han and Wuming. By teaming up, Ling Han and Wuming had essentially become the sturdiest shield and sharpest spear in the world. This was a perfect team. Even though Tian, Qingyue, and the others were top-notch Monarch tiers, and even though they had a significant advantage in cultivation level, they were still helpless against Ling Han's incredibly powerful physique. Meanwhile, Wuming's attacks were like relentless waves that surged forth one after another. His attacks were like water that penetrated every single gap. the 4 Monarch tears were in a miserable and disheveled state. Surprisingly, all of them were already drenched in blood. Wuming had grasped heaven knew how many powerful celestial techniques, and thus he was able to wantonly unleash them one after another. This caused the Monarch tears to face a mountain load of pressure. Defense! Focus on defense! Tian Qingyue hurriedly shouted. Otherwise, they would be on the back foot and face continuous attacks from Wuming. If this continued, they would eventually be exhausted to death. The 4 Monarch tears immediately joined hands to defend, and this greatly improved their situation. Regardless of how powerful Wuming's attacks were, how could he possibly breach the combined defenses of 4 Monarch tears? After all, Wuming was only at Yang Soul. If he were at Heaven Soul, and if he didn't need to concentrate on defending, he would definitely be able to shatter the combined defenses of the 4 Monarch tears with ease. Upon focusing on defense, the 4 Monarch tears managed to immediately stabilize their situation. They then started to plan a counterattack. This was a great test for Ling Han. Just then, they had been mindlessly attacking, so Ling Han had also been able to mindlessly defend. In any case, he would simply block any attack that came his way. Now, however, the 4 Monarch tears were only launching attacks from time to time. This was, in fact, even harder to defend against. Ling Han needed to be completely focused. Otherwise, if he allowed an attack to strike Wuming, that might lead to great catastrophe. Ling Han couldn't help but feel strange. In the past, he and Wuming had always been trying to kill each other. Moreover, their killing intent had been extremely resolute. Now, however, they were happily teaming up with each other, and Wuming was even entrusting his back to Ling Han. This was something that Ling Han could never have dreamed of. "Do you think this is useful?" Wuming asked in a baleful voice. He shook his right hand, drawing a sword that was radiating with an ice-cold aura. Celestial tool, severed passion sword. Whoosh! The sword slashed down, with its might shaking the heavens. This was a celestial tool, so even if it hadn't awakened, just its sharpness alone was already enough to greatly threaten those under the level of Celestial King. Unless one were significantly more powerful, and unless they could knock the celestial tool out of their opponent's hand with a single strike, this would be an unbelievably powerful and deadly weapon. Was Ling Han's physique powerful enough? Yet, he still didn't dare to let himself be struck by the severed passion sword. The sword slashed down, and the expressions of the 4 Monarch tears changed drastically. They frantically shot back in retreat. Just what kind of fucking pseudo-celestial tool was this? How was it so terrifying? "No, this isn't a pseudo-celestial tool. It's a genuine celestial tool!" Tian Qingyue suddenly exclaimed in astonishment. "What?" Xiahou Tong and the others were stunned upon hearing this. A celestial tool. Celestial tools were treasures that uniquely belonged to celestial kings. In fact, some celestial kings didn't even own any celestial tools. Only powerful celestial kings could possibly own such a weapon. This was a symbol of status and power. Now, however, a measly young soul cultivator actually possessed a celestial tool? Who could believe this? Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The severed passion sword continued to slash down, sending waves of sword chi through the air. The might of this sword chi was no weaker than the might of the blade itself. The combined defense of the 4 Monarch tears was instantly shattered. Like a husband and wife facing great calamity, they each fled their own separate ways. Who could resist the might of a celestial tool? Of course, this was unless an immortal palace tier elite arrived. They didn't need to be at the 4th secret or 5th secret, and they simply needed to be at the 1st secret. After all, immortal palace tier elites possessed a crushing advantage over dividing soul tier cultivators. What did it matter that the 4 Monarch tiers were extremely powerful? Before a 1st secret elite, they couldn't even block a single attack. Similarly, the attack of a 1st secret elite could instantly knock the celestial sword from Wuming's hand. No, with a single punch, Wuming would immediately be reduced into a cloud of blood, upon which his celestial tool would clatter on the ground. Now, however, the 4 Monarch tears could only flee in disarray. With Ling Han acting as a human shield, they simply had no way of attacking and suppressing Wuming. Apart from fleeing, what else could they do? The eyes of their followers widened in shock and disbelief. How was this possible? Just how in the world was this possible? In terms of cultivation level, the 4 Monarch tiers were all at Heaven's Soul, which possessed a crushing advantage over Yang Soul. In terms of natural talent, Tian, Qingyue and the others were all top-notch Monarch tiers. Thus, how could they be surpassed? Meanwhile, in terms of numbers, they were also enjoying an advantage of 4 to 2. Yet, even so, they were still suppressed and forced to scurry around like rats. They were like dogs without a home. Heavens! Ling Han and Wuming were far too powerful. As expected of paramount prodigies who had ascended the most venerable divine path, they had forcefully turned an impossibility into a possibility. When the 4 Monarch tiers had ascended the Golden Dragon Bridge, one of them had the potential to become an 8th heaven celestial king. Now, however, even the most venerable divine path had been triggered, and it had more so been triggered by 2 people. Just what kind of devastating individuals would they become? The onlookers could only draw a sharp breath. Their heads were numb with shock. Perhaps they were witnessing the rise of 2 paramount emperors. Retreat! The 4 Monarch tiers abandoned any remaining hope. They couldn't breach Ling Han's defenses, and they were also being completely smashed by Wuming's attacks. As such, what was the point of continuing this battle? Xiao, Xiao, Xiao! Tian, Qingyue and the others fled in 4 separate directions. Ling Han and Wuming didn't chase after them. First of all, their speed was similar, so they couldn't necessarily catch up anyway. Second of all, this was potentially a trap set up by the 4 Monarch tiers. It was possible that they would fall into a trap if they gave chase. Ling Han, if it weren't for the fact that I have a strong reason to kill you, I would have truly wanted to become friends with you, Wuming said as he sheathed his severed passion sword. He didn't seize this opportunity to attack Ling Han. Ling Han smiled and said, "Same." The battle just then had truly been thrilling and mesmerizing. "Next time we meet, I'll unleash my full power to kill you," Wuming said, his voice suddenly turning cold. His eyes were radiating with powerful killing intent. "You better pray that you won't be crushed into oblivion by me," Ling Han retorted. He didn't back down at all. Wuming roared with laughter. He wasn't sneering at Ling Han's audacity, but he was instead appreciating the strength and resolve of his opponent. He flicked his sleeves and walked into the canyon. Ling Han gazed at his disappearing figure for a moment before saying, "Let's enter as well." The Empress and the others nodded in reply, and their eyes were filled with emotion as they gazed at Ling Han. This man was far too mighty and domineering. This caused their hearts to flutter in excitement. In fact, they felt a powerful urge to leap into his embrace, and they yearned for him to passionately kiss them and make love with them. The 4 of them entered the canyon. However, they didn't follow Wuming. This canyon was extremely large, so there was absolutely no need to choose the same path. Whoosh! Only after entering the canyon did they realize just how powerful the wind was. While standing outside the canyon just then, they had only been able to sense a wisp of the wind's might. Now, however, they could feel the vicious intent of the wind. With each gust of wind, rocks and dust would surge through the surroundings. It was as if some elite had launched a powerful attack. Moreover, even with Ling Han's powerful physique, he still couldn't help but feel pain from the violently flying rocks. After facing several hits head-on, he didn't dare to expose himself anymore. He activated a movement technique, and started to dance around the flying rocks. Meanwhile, they also had to collect these flying rocks as the latter might possess traces of heavenly dragon bone ashes. However, with the relentless gusts of vicious winds, it was truly hard to collect the rocks. Trying to grab these rocks was like trying to face the powerful attack of an elite head-on. It would shake them to the core and make them want to spit blood. Thus, Ling Han and the others only managed to roam around the canyon for a single day. Afterward, they had no choice but to return to the Azure Dragon Town to rest. Chapter 2067 Counterattack of the 4 Monarch tiers. Chapter 2067 Counterattack of the 4 Monarch tiers. After returning to the Azure Dragon Town, Ling Han asked the villagers some questions again. Only then did he realize that he had been slightly misled. One could indeed find heavenly dragon bone ashes in that canyon. Moreover, that canyon was also the best place to search for heavenly dragon bone ashes. However, this was entirely time-dependent. During an entire year, there would only be 3 or so days when the canyon would become calm, without a single gust of wind. At that time, it would be extremely easy to enter and search for heavenly dragon bone ashes. After this time, however, the canyon would become chaotic with violent wind. In fact, even immortal palace tier elites would cry in pain if they were struck by the flying rocks. Ling Han couldn't help but sigh with emotion. This place was isolated from the outside world, yet even so, the people were still unable to maintain their innocence. They were also cunning, and they would also play tricks on others. Anyhow, the 3 calm days definitely weren't now. Instead, it had been during the time that they had been fighting. Thus, there was simply no way that they could obtain any heavenly dragon bone ashes. Meanwhile, news of Ling Han and Wuming's battle against the 4 Monarch tiers also started to spread. In the beginning, no one believed this news. Wasn't this a joke? Just what kind of beings were the 4 Monarch tiers? Any single one of them could easily crush all of the other outsiders. However, when it was revealed that Ling Han and Wuming had walked across the most venerable divine path, many people instantly believed this news. That was the most venerable divine path. This was a path that had never been traversed before. In fact, even that paramount prodigy in the past, the one who had become an 8th heaven celestial king, had only managed to ascend a golden dragon bridge. Thus, what kind of concept was ascending the most venerable divine path? Were they destined to become 9th heaven celestial kings? Or were they destined to become rulers among 9th heaven celestial kings? However, the powerful image of the 4 Monarch tiers was already deeply ingrained in everyone's mind. Thus, there were still many people who refused to believe this news. They were adamant that this was a rumor used to slander and shake the leadership of the 4 powerful Monarch tiers. Ling Han had no intention of becoming a leader and whatnot, so he naturally couldn't be bothered explaining himself. He left the others to argue among themselves. 3 days passed, and the 4 Monarch tier finally made a decision. They chose to ally with some tribe. After another day, Ling Han suddenly realized that he and the Empress surprisingly hadn't signed a contract with any of the tribes yet. If they didn't sign a contract, they couldn't represent a tribe in battle. What's going on? He went over to ask, only to learn that he, the Empress, and Wuming had all been kicked out from the alliance. Heh! Ling Han immediately chuckled. Perhaps Tian, Qingyue and the others wanted to target him and Wuming in the following battle between tribes. By expelling them from the alliance, even if Ling Han and the others found another tribe to ally with, they would still be at a numerical disadvantage at that time. Moreover, this would be a severe numerical disadvantage. They would be outnumbered at least 100 to 1. That being the case, even if Ling Han and Wuming teamed up, could they hope to achieve victory? Ling Han shook his head. Who had come up with this plan? Did they really think it would work? If he and Wuming both chose to join the same tribes as Tian, Qingyue and the others, wouldn't his plan have come undone? Ling Han pondered this for a moment. Even though he was aware of these people's plans, he still wouldn't choose to join the same tribes as them. This was for his pride, if not for nothing else. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Ling Han knew that it was unhelpful to act rashly at this moment. However, he couldn't suppress his pride no matter what. Moreover, he recalled the words of the elder that Du Xiaojun had mentioned before. Joining the powerful side didn't necessarily guarantee victory. By the looks of things right now, the side with the 4 Monarch tiers definitely possessed an advantage. No matter how one looked at it, Ling Han and the others were on the slightly weaker side. Even with Wuming, they were still at a disadvantage. Was there still any doubt about the result? Ling Han, we're going to crush these people's A*S, Qingyue said in anger. She shook her dainty fists as she spoke. She was eager to pummel these people, especially since Ling Han always prevented her from crushing other people's A*SES. She was feeling extremely rebellious at this moment. Ling Han couldn't help but grimace. He felt overwhelming regret for having destroyed someone's A*S before Qingyue before. Now, Qingyue was always itching to replicate his feat. Alright, do what you want. However, you definitely have to use a staff, Ling Han said in a stern voice. Alright, Qingyue answered in excitement. She clapped her hands in glee. The Empress and bewitching maiden Ro involuntarily shed cold sweat. Could this be regarded as a warning? One of them was unreliable, and the other was even more unreliable. They went to look for the elder of Azure Dragon Town. Regardless of whether they had a representative or not, they definitely had to sign the contract in person. This couldn't be done by a representative. When the four of them arrived at the Divine Temple, they saw Tian, Qingyue, and the other Monarch standing before the gates, wearing expressions of scorn and ridicule. Ling Han, we've all chosen to join the primordial Iron Tribe, Tian Qingyue suddenly said. What's the meaning of this? Ling Han came to a sudden realization. By telling them which tribe they had joined, they were trying to rile up Ling Han and the others. Even if Ling Han and the others wanted to join the same tribe, would they have the face to? In any case, there were hundreds of outsiders here, so it was naturally impossible to hide this news. Since that was the case, they decided to proudly reveal this to Ling Han. After learning of this, would he still have the face to join the same tribe? Could he stand to lose this face? Ugly B*TCH, what are you being so arrogant for? Qingyue glared at her and said, Just you wait. In a moment Neo will pummel all of you. Tian Qingyue and the others wore expressions of disdain. They were already aware that Qingyue and the Empress had also triggered the Golden Dragon Bridges, meaning that their cultivation talent was on the same level. However, they possessed the crushing advantage of 3 minor levels, so which of them couldn't suppress Qingyue and the Empress with ease? As such, did they need to pay any attention to them? However, the expressions of disdain immediately vanished from their faces. This wasn't because Qingyue was baring her teeth at them. Instead, it was because a young man in white had walked over. Wuming. This was a paramount prodigy that no one could ignore. In terms of offensive prowess alone, he was peerless in the world. Ling Han, are you interested in teaming up with me and slaying these weaklings again? Wuming said with a smile. His teeth were sparkling white, and they were indescribably attractive. All right, Ling Han replied with a smile. He also wanted to pummel the 4 Monarch. Wuming nodded in acknowledgement. He then gazed at the 4 Monarch, and his expression was as if he were looking at lambs ready for slaughter. The disdain on his face couldn't be hidden. One had to realize that Wuming wasn't in his peak state right now. His divided soul hadn't entered this place, so he could only unleash 50% of his battle prowess. Then we'll eliminate you too when the battle begins, Xia Hotong said in a calm voice. He was brimming with confidence. Make sure to clean your A*S. Neo is going to obliterate all of your A*SES. Qingyue also said in a threatening voice. Tian Qingyue and the others almost tripped and fell upon hearing this. A mighty Monarch was actually uttering such words. This was far too crude and uncouth. Moreover, she was also a breathtakingly beautiful woman. It was simply impossible to imagine such words coming from her mouth. You wait and see. The 4 Monarch didn't argue with them any longer. Against someone like Qingyue, who dared to say anything, their battle prowess was truly insufficient. Ling Han smiled before entering the Divine Dragon Temple with the 3 women. Because most people had already chosen a tribe to ally with, the 7 large tribes were indifferent toward Ling Han and the others. After all, they couldn't change much regardless of which tribe they joined. Then we'll choose the Bronze Tribe, Ling Han said. Chapter 2068 Black Figures. Chapter 2068 Black Figures. The Bronze Tribe was the tribe of old monk Na Su. In the beginning, they had tried extremely hard to recruit Ling Han and the others, offering them many benefits. This time, however, the old monk couldn't even be bothered greeting the 5 of them. He sent a young subordinate over to dismiss them. The reason for this was very simple. The battle had yet to begin, yet the conclusion was already foregone. Old monk Na Su was in a bad mood right now, so he naturally didn't want to meet with Ling Han and the others. However, Ling Han was filled with enthusiasm, and he started to chit-chat with the young subordinate. He then continued to propose an alliance. In the end, the Bronze Tribe couldn't endure Ling Han's relentless pursuit anymore, so they agreed to give Ling Han and the others enough heavenly dragon bone ashes. This would allow them to receive 10 times more benefits when they were instilled with power by the 100 dragons. This naturally came with conditions. Ling Han and the others couldn't receive the heavenly dragon bone ashes simply by participating in the battle. Rather, they could only receive these benefits if they helped the Bronze Tribe win a dragon pearl. If they succeeded, they could claim the rewards. In any case, there were only 5 of them, so the Bronze Tribe could definitely accept this exchange. Even so, the Bronze Tribe still didn't have much hope. After all, Ling Han and the others were facing far too great a disadvantage. Although there had been cases of underdogs winning in the past, the difference in power definitely hadn't been so great. The remaining 5 tribes naturally had an even smaller chance of winning. This was because they had no one to represent them in battle. This time, they could only act as spectators. Thus, in their eyes, the actions of Ling Han and the others were nothing but a huge joke. When news of this spread, the atmosphere of Azure Dragon Town instantly became carefree and joyous. Everyone was discussing this peculiar matter. This caused Qingyue and Bewitching Maiden Road to feel pent up with anger. They vowed that they would definitely obliterate the *SES of those people in the upcoming battle. Indeed, even Bewitching Maiden Rose started to go down this violent path. Although the Empress didn't speak, the fury in her eyes was also especially evident. It was amid such an atmosphere that the battle finally started. All of the outsiders were brought to a canyon, though this was not the same canyon as before. This was a long and narrow canyon that had 7 entrances in total. Each tribe had a canyon of their own, yet right now, only 2 of the tribes needed to participate in the battle. Moreover, no matter how one looked at it, the Bronze Tribe was simply participating with no chance of victory. They were simply here for show. Ling Han, Wuming, and the others made their way to the entrance. However, a huge boulder blocked their path. This boulder was called Dragon's Severing Stone, and it had rested here for hundreds of millions of years. Only when the battle started would this boulder automatically move aside. Otherwise, even ascending origin tier elites couldn't do anything about this boulder. Ling Han and the others stood before this boulder, silently waiting for it to move aside. The rules of the battle were extremely simple. They simply needed to battle for 10 days in a row. Afterward, the side with the most remaining people would be crowned the victor. It was also because of this rule that the side with the greater numbers would possess a huge advantage. Simply put, as long as they remained together and defended with all their might, they would easily win if more than 5 of them lasted until the end of the battle. "We need to unleash our full power to slaughter them," Wuming said in a calm voice. It was as if he weren't talking about killing people, but instead talking about killing a few chickens and ducks. Meanwhile, Qingyue was already waving her fists eagerly in anticipation. She couldn't wait to obliterate the *SES of those people. In fact, she had already prepared a long iron pole. Moreover, this pole was made from level 4 pseudo-divine metal. She had nabbed this pseudo-divine metal from Ling Han before he could even feed it to his divine demon sword. Rumble. The dragon's severing stone suddenly started to move, rolling into the canyon. The earth was also quaking, and it wasn't long before the gigantic boulder disappeared from sight. The battle of the 7 tribes had officially begun. Wang Wang Wang! Wisps of black air suddenly materialized beside Ling Han and the others. These wisps of black air then transformed into humanoid shapes, though they were devoid of facial features and legs. They only had long arms, and they hovered half a feet above the ground. "What is this?" Ling Han and the others instantly entered a defensive stance. Meanwhile, Qingyue dragged her finger across the air, unleashing a deadly burst of light that slashed at one of the black figures. Pooh! The burst of light slashed down, and a gaping hole instantly appeared in the black figure's chest. However, the black figure didn't disappear. Instead, It slowly gathered together again, returning to its original form. It continued to hover in the air. The black figures didn't launch a counterattack, and it was as if they were nothing more than hovering mist. Ling Han observed them carefully, only to discover an extremely faint symbol on the heads of these black figures. It was because the black air was slightly fainter in that region that he could see the symbols. He had seen this symbol before. It was the symbol of the Bronze Tribe. TSK, in other words, these black figures are on our side? Do they have any use? Can we use them to battle? Ling Han suddenly recalled Du Xiaojuan's words again. The more powerful side wouldn't necessarily win. Perhaps it was because of these black figures? Whoosh! The black figures suddenly started to hover forward. Follow them! The 5 of them followed the black figures. If they continued forward, they would eventually reach the central region of the canyon. It was the same for all of the 7 paths. They converged at the center, where the 7 tribes would then descend into an intense battle. Ling Han looked around, and he saw that there were around 200 to 300 black figures in total. This was essentially the same as the total number of outsiders. TSK, is this to make up for our disadvantage in numbers? Is this why there's a saying that the more powerful side won't necessarily win? This was extremely likely. That being the case, these black figures were definitely very powerful. Otherwise, if they were easily destroyed, what would be the point of giving them these black figures? Ling Han carefully counted the number of black figures. There were 232 of them in total. In that case, he would count the number of their opponents in a while. In any case, the answer was going to reveal itself soon. They continued forward, and it wasn't long before they arrived at the central region of the canyon. This was a large expanse of flat land, and there were 7 entrances in total. When Ling Han and the others arrived, a large group of people also charged out from the entrance 2 others away from them. This was none other than Tian, Qingyue, and the others. At almost the same moment, 5 groups of black figures also hovered out from the remaining 5 entrances. Their number was clear at first glance. Each group consisted of precisely 237 figures. Ling Han glanced over Tian, Qingyue, and the others, and their total number immediately appeared in his mind. OL start equals 237. In other words, upon entering the canyon, the groups with fewer people would receive these black figures to make up for the difference. Thus, Ling Han and the others had received 232 black figures. Adding the 5 of them, they numbered precisely 237. At this moment, Tian, Qingyue, and the others also noticed the existence of the black figures. They all wore expressions of astonishment. What in the world is this? Right at this moment, however, all of the black figures started to move. Some of them charged at Tian, Qingyue, while some of them charged at Ling Han and the others. In complete contrast to their passive behavior from before, they were now filled with vigor and liveliness. They were brimming with killing intent, and it was as if they would charge forward even if they were facing an army of tens of thousands. Boom! The first black figure arrived before them, reaching over to grab Ling Han. Its arms were filled with black vein patterns, and these patterns were exuding an ice-cold aura that instilled apprehension in one's mind. Ling Han humphed as he replied with a punch of his own. Chapter 2069 Might. Chapter 2069 Might. Pun! With a single punch from Ling Han, the black figure was instantly smashed into pieces. However, to his surprise, the black figure started to rapidly regather and reform. It then swung its long arm, striking at his back. Are these black figures undying monsters? Ling Han leaped to the side, dodging this attack. Meanwhile, he started to analyze the situation in his mind. The battle prowess of these black figures was at Earth's soul. Although they couldn't rival supreme monarch tiers such as Tian Qingyue, or even ordinary monarch tiers such as Du Xiaojun, they still posed a huge threat to those with a battle prowess under the level of Earth's soul. This was because they couldn't be destroyed. Ah! Agonized screams started to resound through the air. These were the screams of people who had underestimated the danger posed by the black figures. They had thought that they could destroy them with a single strike. In the end, however, they had ended up being killed instead. Ling Han immediately adjusted his opinion of the black figures. They were undying Earth Soul beings, so they would pose a huge threat even to Heaven Soul cultivators. Just then, he had witnessed several Heaven Soul elites being killed with a single strike. Most importantly, there was an exorbitant number of these black figures. More than 1,000 of them had charged out in unison, and most of them had charged toward Tian, Qingyue, and the others. Why? This was because they had an advantage in numbers. Thus, they were naturally the bigger target. In reality, these black figures were extremely fair. In terms of ratio, the number of black figures attacking Ling Han and the others was the same as the number of black figures attacking Tian, Qingyue, and the others. They all had to face around 6 black figures. However, on Ling Han's side, they were all extremely powerful prodigies. Even bewitching Maiden Ro could crush Yin Soul cultivators, so she could still manage to hang on against the Earth Soul black figures. As long as Ling Han looked out for her, she could naturally hold her own against these opponents. In an instant, a dozen or so members of Tian Qingyue's team had already been killed. Moreover, this number was still steadily rising. It was no wonder that the elders had said that those who were more powerful wouldn't necessarily win. Truly, the destructive ability of these black figures was quite remarkable. Even as powerful as Tian Qingyue and the others were, it was still hard to say whether they could survive the relentless attacks of these freaks for 10 entire days. These black figures didn't experience fatigue, didn't experience pain, and didn't even die. Were such opponents not terrifying? Hurry, enter the defensive formation! Tian Qingyue and the other Monarch hurriedly exclaimed. This was their best choice at the moment. One group rest, and the other group take responsibility for maintaining the defenses. We'll rotate after a while. We need to battle for 10 days, so everyone obey the commands, otherwise it's your own life on the line. Those who possess battle prowess above Earth Soul step forward to attack, easily shattering the black figures. However, these black figures continued to regather, and they were simply impossible to destroy. This posed a huge threat to their defenses. Fortunately, they had Tian Qingyue and the other Monarch to help them. With their help, their mortality rate instantly decreased. At the very least, no one was dying at this moment. Meanwhile, Wuming chuckled coldly as he charged forward. Pun pun pun! One after another, several black figures were easily smashed apart. Wuming then charged at Tian Qingyue and the others, drawing his severed passion sword without hesitation as he did so. With a slash, powerful sword soared into the sky. Humph! Tian Qingyue and Xia Hotong immediately stepped forward to block his strike. They each launched a powerful and domineering punch. Pun! Wuming was instantly sent stumbling back. Even though his severed passion sword was indestructible, what use would it be if it couldn't strike its target? After all, Tian Qingyue and the other Monarch still possessed a stronger battle prowess. Thus, the result of this exchange was decided by their cultivation level. However, Wuming didn't care about this. He continued to dance around, with his severed passion sword slashing down again and again. Xiao, xiao, xiao! Bursts of sword chi sliced through the air, surging toward his enemies. His goal was extremely evident. He wanted to disperse these people's defenses. The true killer wouldn't be him, but rather the black figures. Detestable! Tian Qi roared in fury. By teaming up with Xia Hotong, he could completely suppress the might of Wuming's attacks. He could send Wuming flying before he had even neared them. However, there were only 2 people, so how could they block all of Wuming's chaotic attacks? His attacks were extremely random and chaotic. In order to dodge his attacks, the other cultivators had no option but to disperse. By doing so, however, their defensive formation was immediately rendered useless. The black figures surged forward, instantly ripping several people to shreds. Blood sprayed through the air, and this was an extremely gruesome sight. Don't disperse! Don't disperse! Some of the cultivators hurriedly exclaimed. Upon seeing the fate awaiting those who dispersed, the fleeing cultivators immediately ran back, reforming the defensive formation. A smile spread across Wuming's face, and he immediately slashed down with his severed passion sword again. A burst of sword chi that measured 9 meters tall and 2 meters wide immediately surged forth. However, the cultivators gritted their teeth and refused to flee. Boom! The burst of sword chi swept over, instantly causing blood to spray through the sky. At least a dozen or so people were directly crushed to death. After all, this was a celestial tool. If its might were truly unleashed, even ascending origin tier elites would be killed in an instant. Right now, only a portion of its power was being unleashed. Even so, it was still utterly terrifying. Was this something that dividing soul tier cultivators could block? Everyone was transfixed with shock. So, should they dodge or not? Either way, their fate would still be death. Attack him together! Zhu Huiyan cried. She immediately charged over. They had purposefully kicked Ling Han and Ji Wuming out of the alliance, and they had then angered them into signing a contract with a different tribe. Was their aim not to crush their opponent through advantage in numbers? Now, however, their advantage in number wasn't helping them at all. Facing the wave of black figures, they could only suffer a beating. If this continued, they would definitely collapse. Thus, while they were still great in number, they would work together to dispose of Ji Wuming and Ling Han. As long as one of them was killed, Tian, Qingyue, and the others simply needed to ensure their own safety until the end of the battle. That way, victory would ultimately belong to them. Die! The other cultivators were also burning with fury. They were either going to be killed by the black figures or Ji Wuming, so they might as well unleash their full power and take a gamble. If they succeeded in killing Ji Wuming, their perilous situation would naturally be alleviated. Their thirst for life allowed them to unleash an astonishing battle prowess. One after another, numerous treasures were summoned without hesitation. There were also decrees, and these were the simplest of treasures. At this moment, the sky was drowned out by celestial light. The might of these cultivators' attacks was simply astounding. Meanwhile, the 4 supreme monarch tiers also joined hands to attack Ji Wuming. As for the black figures, they were left to the other few monarch tiers. In addition to them, a dozen or so heaven soul cultivators were also battling against the black figures. Right now, they were all working together to kill Ji Wuming. Have you forgotten about me? Ling Han roared. He unleashed his 9 heavens flame divided soul, and he furiously charged forward with divine demon sword in hand. Pun pun pun! Like a lion charging into a flock of sheep, he instantly sent everyone around him flying. Some of them were in one piece, while some of them had already been reduced into shattered flesh and blood. We can't allow them to work together! Zhu Huiyan shrieked. Not only had the 4 monarch tiers witnessed the combined power of Ling Han and Ji Wuming before, but they had even faced their insurmountable might. One of them possessed unparalleled defenses, while the other possessed unrivaled attacks. If they teamed up, they could easily destroy everyone at the same cultivation level. Tian, Qingyue, and Xia Hotong immediately summoned 4 divided souls each, sending them over to block Ling Han. With them using 8 divided souls to attack Ling Han, it was clear that they held him in extremely high regard. Heh! Without any hesitation, Ling Han immediately unleashed a great clash of source powers. Pun pun pun! The 8 divided souls were all sent flying. They were nowhere near as powerful as their owners. If one wanted their divided souls to be as powerful as themselves, they would need to absorb celestial king tier divided souls while they were dividing their souls. For example, absorbing a source power of heaven and earth. Otherwise, they would need to be like Ji Wuming. That was, they needed to be a celestial king in their past life. If they couldn't achieve this, it was simply impossible for their divided souls to be as powerful as themselves. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.